Hello dear viewers, support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it, and also make sure you comment your thought. Now let's start the video. Wintertown, Flea Bottom, 2097 AC. Bethany. 3 moons she'd been here, and each day she woke up knowing that she and her family were safe and that they would eat. Compared to the life she had on Lord Bolton's lands, it was night and day. There, some days they'd go without, and ever since her husband had passed, it was more and more of them. Even working in the dirty tavern didn't earn her much coin or keep food on the table. But she had done her best for her 2 girls. When she heard the men speak of the offer in the tavern, she couldn't believe it. They were leaving, and she did her best to get them to take her and her children with them. She soon found herself walking behind a cart, Daryl and his wife agreeing to let her girls ride with their own children, but not having the room for her. It took them some time to make it to the King's Road, and from there to Winterfell. It was a long walk, and she wondered what she'd find when she got there. Now 3 moons later, she set the table, and Verena and Branda, her girls, sat down to eat the warm porridge, both girls looking happier and healthier than they ever had. Sitting down beside them, she looked around her new home. She'd only moved in a few weeks earlier, and it put the hovel they had lived in before to shame. The girls had a warm room, and her own was almost as big as their whole house had been. "You girls looking forward to your first day?" she asked. "And Mama Lara said we'd learn to read," Branda said, excitedly. "So I've heard you're to go to Sarah's house after you understand," she said. "Aye, Mama, we will," Verena said. Once the girls had eaten and she had cleaned up, Bethany walked with them to the large building she'd be leaving them in. They and a group of other children would be the first to learn to read here, Lady L having sent men to each of their houses to see who wished to learn. As soon as they had reached Bethany, she had asked for her girls to be given the chance, being able to read and write a boon she'd never expected for them. "Now be good, and I'll see you later," she said, smiling, as they met up with Sarah's girls and walked into the building. She then walked to the tavern to begin her day's works, cooking, cleaning, and listening. The coin she earned more than she had thought possible. The tavern was as always busy, and the pies and soup were wolfed down by the men and women who were there, Bethany carrying them out and serving them herself when she wasn't preparing the next batch to be cooked. She listened out for the little bits of information that may prove useful, travelers being the best source, and though none of it meant much to her, he always paid well, and she'd never had to make something up. It was dark when she finished her work and walked back to her house, stopping off at Sarah's to collect the girls. Once they'd eaten and told her of their day, she put them to bed. Both girls were tired and so were asleep when he came. Bethany in the middle of her own meal when he knocked at the door. "Any news for me?" he asked. "Only that the Lord and Lady are soon to be wed," she said, and the man nodded. "That the new ship carries even more men and women this time, and that Lord Bolton has put an end to anyone leaving his lands, too many having left already." "Is the Lord planning to speak to Lord Stark of it?" he asked. "I don't know. It's not something anyone has said." "Very well, I'll see you next week," he said as he placed the coins on the table and left. She finished her meal and locked up, grabbing the coins and walking up the stairs. After checking in on the girls, she entered her own room, the fire soon burning away in the corner as she pulled out the small chest from the hole in the wall. Inside it was her most valuable things. A handkerchief that had belonged to her husband, and a bag full of coins which she added the others to. After placing it back, she went to her bed. She had earned more since she came here than she had ever had previously. Enough to eat and live well, and enough so her girls would have something when they were older. Closing her eyes, she rolled over to fall asleep, a small little smile on her face, though it was Lord Stark and the lady who were making Wintertown what it was becoming. Among the older people, they spoke of how it had not been his idea to do so. They spoke of how the Lord had not done anything with Wintertown for many years, and it was not until his son had come back that he'd even begun to do so. She heard tales of how he had helped the North, tales from people of how he'd helped those in the South who came on the ships. It was the older residents of Wintertown, though, that seemed to have the truth of it as far as she was concerned. Jon Snow had brought the wolves back to Winterfell. The White Wolf had come to save them all. Jaxlyn Waters. Even since the tourney life had been better, they ate actual food and not whatever they could fill a bowl of brown with. Being 3 and 10, he was almost the same age as the lady and young lord, and so he looked at them differently than his mother or others did. He liked that others had heard of how he'd put a fish in his place and won the tourney, even if it was for boys of their age and not men. That he also turned out to be a bastard meant more to him, as he too was one himself. When he and his mother had stood and watched them and heard what they said, he had not believed them. Why would they help? What did they care? Even when they got the first package of food, he had thought that would be that. They'd eat well for a day or two, and then it'd be back to normal. The packages kept coming, though, and over time he began to believe that maybe things would stay this way, maybe they were different than the rest of them. He had almost lost that belief a year or so later when his mother fell ill. They had no money for the healer, and he had no way to earn it. It was when he was collecting his package that the man asked, was he well? And Jackson had broken down and cried, telling him his problems. The man had made him follow him and taken him to a large warehouse where he'd talked to another man. Wait here, he said, and Jackson almost ran away, but something made him stay. Some voice in his head making him wish to wait and see. Where do you live, lad? An older man said after he'd been waiting for a while. My mother and I have a room, Sarah, he said, looking to the man. I'm no Sarah, name's Artos. Come, let's go see your mother. Artos said. Why? He asked, looking at the man suspiciously. I hear she's ill. I'm going to take a look and see what I can do for her, lad. Artos said. I've no coin, he said sadly. You won't need any. Come, the longer we stay here, the less time I have helping your mother. Jackson couldn't believe it. The idea that someone would come to help without the offer of coin was beyond him. He walked hurriedly with Artos back to his house, and when they got there, he found his mother trying to clean up, coughing as she did so. May, you need to sit to rest, he said, trying to make her sit down. I'm good. I need to work. Who are you? His mother said when she saw Artos. I'm here to help. You're ill. I'm here to have a look and try to make you well again. Artos said. Jace? His mother asked. Please, Ma, he said, and she nodded. Jackson helping Artos bring her to her bed. He waited a long time, and when Artos came back, he didn't look happy. Jackson immediately fearing the worst. Your mother needs to rest, to stay in bed. I'll have one of the men bring you your packages, but you need to stay with her. Will she get better? He asked worriedly. She needs to take this every day. Give it to her in her soup. Artos said, holding up a small jar. Just a pinch, he said, taking an amount in his hand to show him. Every day? He asked, and Artos nodded. Every day. I'll be back in a couple of days to check her again. Do this, keep her in bed, and she'll be as right as rain in a few weeks. Artos said. The man was true to his word. He came back and checked Jackson's mother 4 times over the next 2 weeks. The food packages were delivered to their door and contained extra fruit which he made his mother eat. When talking to Artos before he left, each time Jackson learned more about him. He'd left the Maesters and now worked for the Lord and Lady. Jon Snow and Marjorie Tyrell's coin paying his wage and for the packages he ate, and when his mother got better, Jackson thanked the gods for them both. Over time, he grew bigger and stronger, and when he heard of the offer of a new life in the North, he couldn't wait to tell his mother. It took them some time for their place on the list to come up, but when it did, they didn't have long to wait to leave. Standing on the docks, he wondered what the North was like, how cold it truly was, and would he really have a better life there? He also knew that his mother worried even more than he. Are you sure about this, Jace? She asked him when they had gotten to the docks. I am Messin, Jon and Margaery pay for this ship just like our food and the healers. The North is where he's from, and they're bringing people there for a better life, he said. How do you know? Artos told me I should do this. He saved you, Messin. When you were sick, he saved you. Because of them, he was able to. Because of them, we've got a chance to live better, he said, and she nodded. He held his mother's hand as he walked up the gangplank around him. A crowd of people, all looking for the same thing he was, and all wearing the same expressions on their face, all of them full of hope for the future. Taxtily Rock 2097 AC. 4th Moon. Yakaris. Targaryen. The dragons were gone, flying somewhere that Radix refused to tell him about. Licaron too staying silent for now. He had tried to warg into her to see where it was she was going. Into Licaron too, but they refused to allow him. Radix only telling him that it was something they needed to do. Given that he was leaving to go to King's Landing, it was probably for the best. It also allowed Sorella to come with them, which he was happy about. Still, it had only been one night, and he missed them both, finding that he already wished it was over, and he could be with them again. He had spent his name-day night with his sister and son, laying against them as he contemplated what it meant and what he would soon be doing. Rhaenys too, speaking her thoughts aloud in his head, bringing up comparisons he'd not wished to think of. Father should have named you Daeron, Rhaenys said. I'm happy with my name, he replied. You would be the young dragon reborn, conquering a land at 4 and 10 and coming to your throne, she said. You think it'd be that easy? I think you were born to be king, little brother, and king you will be, and anyone who stands in your way will fall, she said, and he smiled. I'm glad you're with me, Ray. Of course you are. It'll be easier with a dragon, she said with a laugh. No, I'm glad you're with me, Ray, you, my sister. I'm always with you, Jay, she said. He packed the candles away alongside his gifts. Joy had gotten him another book, this one, perhaps, more apt given that it covered Daeron's conquest of Dorne. Jaime had gotten him a wardrobe of clothing. The three-headed dragon and his family's colors clear. His friends had joined together and had a new saddle and shield made for the tourney. And Jenna had gifted him his armor from her brothers, and Tyrion too. Both Robb and Wyman had been just as practical. A northern cloak from Lord Wyman and his family, and a wolf pendant from his brother. As for Margaery, he had asked, and she had agreed, nor to gift him anything. To instead hold it for when they met, and so he could gift her too. They had met once since his last visit. A few days after news had come from King's Landing, he had begun to feel strange. Heading back to his room, he lay down and found himself walking through the woods. J.A., he heard her call out. Margaery, he shouted back, and when he saw her, he ran towards her, lifting her up and holding her in his arms, standing there looking at her as she began to speak. Right, it wouldn't work, Gia. I tried, but for some reason, it wouldn't work, she said as he brushed her hair from her face. I don't understand. I thought it would. Did you do anything different this time? He asked, and she shook her head. No, after what happened, I didn't want you to be alone. I wanted no one needed to see you, she said, and he kissed her, closing his eyes and enjoying the feel of her lips on his. Maybe that's it. Maybe it's times of crisis or worry or something else. Will you bring it with you? He asked, and she nodded as he led her to sit against the tree. She sat between his legs, her back against his front, leaning back against his chest as he wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. This is it, Marge. The last time he takes anything from me, I'm ready, he said as he stroked her hand with his own. Are the dragons truly ready, Jay? She asked, worriedly. They are. I'm going to beat him, Marge. I promise you I'm going to beat him, he said. So we can be wed soon, be married for true, she asked. We are married for true, but we can be wed in the light of the seven soon. Be together, share the future together, he said, kissing her cheek. Together, she said, kissing him back. They lay and talked, telling each other the things they'd done since last they met, speaking of how much they missed each other and how happy they were to be meeting soon. Neither of them really wanting to leave, and yet knowing it was time to do so, he kissed her again and watched as she walked through the woods and then turned to walk away, not seeing the raven as it watched from a distant tree. He had woken with a headache, finding that he'd slept all through the night, and since then he wondered if she had done so again. If she had tried to meet him, or if she had decided to wait until they met in King's Landing once more. He carried his chests from his room, Walder and Jors helping him, while Arthur readied the horses with Richard. They'd be taking 2 ships to King's Landing, Jaina and Kevin in one, and he, Jaime and Garion in the other. They said their goodbyes on the docks, the Lion's Mane carrying Jenna and the others, while they would go on the Lady Joanna. Lancel and Wella were a little upset to be parted, and Wyman's refusal to allow his granddaughter to travel with him did not go down well with the girl. He helped load the horses with Joy, Arthur, and Loras, all of them bringing their own mounts to the tourney this time. Want to stand on deck, Joy? He asked, once they'd settled Winter, Star, Apples, and Bluebell. Watch the birdies, John, Joy said, smirking. And the fishies, he said, looking back. As long as there is no trout, I hate trout, Joy said, making a face, and then she winked at him, and he almost fell over. He was laughing so hard. Come, let's see if we can make a bird dance like last time, he said, and she walked with him up the stairs and out onto the deck. They were soon joined by the others, Arthur and Walder standing behind him with Jors, Loras, Brienne, and Cragen a little further back. He looked back at Lannisport as they sailed away and closed his eyes, the birds flying high in the sky, the doors open wide and ready for him to enter. He reached out to Moore, and he saw them all, Casterly Rock, Deep Den, the Gold Road, and the Stony Sept, and then he was over King's Landing itself, the pigeon welcoming him in. He flew over the Red Keep, and then looked north soon, leaving the pigeon behind. He had no need to see what rested on the pike, and he'd already seen it more than once. No, he needed something different. Something to clear his troubled mind. Soon he was over Rosie and then Antlers. Before he saw them flying over the Isle of Faces, a voice calling him and speaking to him as he soared and moved from door to door. The end is the beginning, it said, and he felt himself being flung forward, all doors shut to him, except one. The bat shouldn't be awake. It was daylight and it lived for the night, and yet, while its brethren slept, it could not. What was worse, though, was it was not itself, and it had no control as it flew, no idea of its destination, and no reason as to why it could see changes in light and shapes. All it knew was it must fly, and fly. It did, over dark walls and broken towers, over the melted stone and disused rooms. It flew, and it watched as below it, what was once empty, was soon full. Banners fluttered in the wind, the gray wolf and the black stag, the blue falcon and the golden rose, and above them all the three-headed dragon. It flew down and close past a maiden with long dark hair beating three men with a wooden sword, past a large man drinking and laughing loudly while a quiet man sat beside him. On it flew and landed by a tree where it roosted and watched. A silver-haired man spoke to men wearing white cloaks, men who listened to every word, and then the bat saw no more. "Jon," Joy said from beside him, and he opened his eyes looking to see as Lannisport finally went from view. "What, sorry, I was supposed to make the birds dance, wasn't I?" he said, and she nodded as he reached out for the nearest gull. Highgarden 2097 AC. Olenna. She knew as soon as the raven came that things had changed, events forcing them to move much more quickly. Mates scrambling, trying to make sense of what it said and trying to once again convince her of why they needed to be joined to the Baratheons. Willis and Allery doing the work of settling her idiot of a son down and explaining, without explaining, why that was a terrible idea. With Viserys dead, Robert would think he'd won. True, he'd know that Daenerys still lived, but he'd not fear a girl with Viserys gone. Instead, he'd do as he had just announced. He'd celebrate it. But it wasn't Robert she was thinking of. Nor was it Viserys, or even Daenerys. It was a Targaryen who was much closer, and what he would make of this news that Olenna tried to concentrate on. Given what he had lost, how much of his family had been taken from him, Olenna knew that he'd not handle this well. She didn't need Margaery to tell her, though her granddaughter did anyway. She didn't need the raven that came from Jon, or the one that came from Jaime Lannister. Even when Margaery came to her with talk of a strange tale of seeing Jon and speaking to him, Olenna didn't need to listen to what she said. She'd known what this had meant the moment Robert took Viserys' head from his body, and so she got ready to play her part. Organizing most of the Reach Lords to travel on this trip to King's Landing wasn't hard. Both the King's request and having Mace send out his own ravens would see to that. She sat at her desk, her fingers pressed against her cheeks, and waited until her grandson came in. Each moment she waited, raising her annoyance, until he finally entered. "Forgive my tardiness, grandmother. Father wished to speak to me," Willis said, as he came and sat down in front of her. "Your father should know better, as should you, but I'm in no mood to chastise either of you right now," she said with a sigh. "Preparations are made for us to leave." "They are. Do you really wish to travel by road, grandmother?" Willis asked. "I do. I wish to meet with the others before we arrive, and it's better to do so over time. The longer I spend with them, the more I will come to know their minds," she said, and her grandson nodded. "I wish you to come with us also," she said, surprising him. "Grandmother, you're wasted here. I wish you to be in King's Landing, to be by mine and Margaery's side, and to be with me when I speak to your father." "You're telling him?" Willis asked, surprised. "I believe I will be on our return as soon as we've left King's Landing," she said. "You truly believe we're that close?" "After what Robert did to Viserys, I'm almost surprised to find that the Red Keep still stands with us," she said, with a snort. "Jon wouldn't, would he?" "He hasn't, and that's a good sign, but I guarantee it crossed his mind. That boy has lost far too much family as it is. We're very lucky he considers us part of his now," she said, with a small smirk. When do you think?" he asked, and she didn't need him to say any more than that. "We'll be at war before the year is finished." "Willis, I doubt he'll wait longer than that." "I'll make my arrangements, Garland will stay," he said, and she nodded. She drummed her fingers on the table when he'd gone, thoughts fleeting as she played things over in her mind. The tourney would be dangerous ground, and all she could do was try to figure out where their bannermen's minds were. Nothing could be said to them without Jon's approval, and even with it, she may need him with them to speak to them himself. Torley, Rowan, Ashford, and Redwine, Hightower, and Fossaway all would need to be brought on board, and it would take a dragon to do so. Paxter, though she needed to bring his children back, to take Hobber and Horace from King's Landing, and to keep them close. They would need the fleet to be free and not be able to be used against them. Even if the Lannisters controlled the seas, their ships would need to be ready to be brought to bear. She got up and walked from the room, strolling through the halls and out to the gardens. Sansa, Margaery, Mina, and the little hens were all speaking excitedly about the upcoming tourney. For Olenna, though, it filled her with trepidation. Memories of Harrenhal loomed fresh in her mind, and with it thoughts of the future they had come so close to. While Jon wasn't his father, even though he had dragons and had done most of the work already, she still found herself worried as she looked to her granddaughter. "Margaery, a moment, child," she called out, and watched as her granddaughter walked towards her. "Yes, grandmother." "Walk with me, sweetling," she said, and Margaery took her arm as they walked along the path in the opposite direction from the others. They did so silently at first, Olenna wanting to make sure they were far enough from where they could be overheard before she spoke. Once she redirected her granddaughter to the summer seat, and had left and right stand back and make sure they were not disturbed. "We must be careful in King's Landing, Margaery. I know you're looking forward to seeing Jon again and may wish to be as affectionate as you would like, but you must not, my child. You must act properly now, more than ever," she said. "I understand, grandmother. I will," Margaery said. "If I had my way, I'd not go to this tourney instead. I'd call our banners and ready for war," she said, hearing the little gasp come from Margaery. "But Jon," Margaery said, "I understand, and I hope it's not the folly of youth. But it's one thing to think of what Robert has done, another to have to witness him celebrate it. Even his best friend couldn't bring himself to do so many years before. For Jon, I fear it will be even worse." Olenna said as she reached out to touch Margaery's face. "He'll need you and you'll wish to be with him. You cannot, Margaery. Not dare." "I can wait, grandmother. I've waited this long. Soon this will be over and we'll be together. I can wait until then." Margaery said determinedly, "Good, be who they expect you to be." "Margaery, not who you truly are," she said, and saw her granddaughter's smirk. She sent a raven to Paxter asking him to come to the tourney and to Baelor, her family. She could trust, and she knew she could not hold back with them much longer. At dinner that night, she was quiet and contemplative. Wellis and Margaery also not saying much, while Mace spoke loudly about the tourney, her son looking forward to seeing Loras compete and to travel to King's Landing and meet the king. Olenna, despite her worry, feeling likewise, even if they were thinking of different people. It took 3 days for them to gather all their supplies and get ready to set off, and in that time she'd found some of her worries fade away. They would go and play a role and be loyal subjects of the crown. And she would watch everyone with a keen eye. Their next steps would define her family's future, secure it, or end it. And though there was risk, the reward made it all worthwhile, so that was what she concentrated on as she climbed into the wheelhouse. "Well, are we just going to sit here all day, or are we setting off?" she said grumpily before the wheelhouse set off, the smile on her face, though showing her true feelings. The Lady Joanna, 2097 AC. "Jaime!" Joanna slept comfortably beside Daisy, his daughter not caring that they were on a ship. Daisy's worries proving unfounded. Instead, he had listened as Joy and Jon told her about the adventure she was going on and the big city she would soon see. They had then helped to wear her out by playing with her while he and Daisy ate. By the time they'd come back to the cabin, she was ready to sleep, and as Daisy lay down beside her, soon she was sleeping too. Over the course of the journey, he waxed them in. Richard, Arthur, and Jon had spoken of what to expect when they got there. Jon surprising them by saying that he'd already seen Viserys' body, then surprising them even more when he spoke about Harrenhal and how he needed to see it for himself, asking them questions of their time there. "I need to know what each of you saw, what you know of my mother and father's movements, and of Robert and Jon Arryn's," Jon said to them as Arthur looked to him. "Are you sure of this, Jon?" he asked. "Aye, I have to see it. It's time for me to know more about it," Jon said, and Jaime looked at him, trying to figure out why now. "I didn't see much of Jon Arryn. Jon Robert was just as you expect, but I saw him with your mother only twice. Once sitting at the table during the feast when your father sang, and once when we had just arrived," Reimagined said. "As for your father, apart from the feast, it was only during the tilts themselves. I saw more of your father than your mother. I mean knowingly of your mother. It was only when we searched for the night that I realized the truth, Jax. That your father and I spent time together. We drank and laughed, and I was with him almost every day. Richard said. You know of my own time, Jon, Jaime said, and Jon nodded and gave him a quick smile before he looked to Arthur. Arthur was more concise than any of them, telling Jon which days he spent with Rhaegar and which he was with him when he was with Lyanna, saying that if he wasn't with Rhaegar, then Barristan or Oswell was. Is that enough? Arthur asked, and all eyes looked to Jon, who nodded. I believe so. I needed guidance. Thank you, Jon said. Over the next few days, he watched as the bandage never left Jon's hand, Arthur telling him and Richard that he was bleeding himself each night, storing the blood up for when he used the candles. While this concerned him, Walder Jaws, Arthur, and even Richard said he shouldn't be worried, and Jon constantly tried to reassure him. What I'm attempting, my lord, requires a lot of magic, a lot of blood. I need it there and ready, and I can't take the risk that there won't be enough, Jon said. Is it not hurting you, making you weaker? He asked. No, I feel good, I'm well, and Sorella tells me as long as I eat and drink enough, rest when I feel tired, then I can do this more often. You really think you need this much? He said, picking up the jar which was nearly full. For what I want? Yeah, I do. Why is it so important to you, Jon? You know pretty much what happened. Why do you need to see it? He asked, still not sure of the reason. They want me to see it, Jon said, looking at him. The old gods, they wish me to see it. There's something there, Jaime. I don't know what it is, but whatever it is, they wish me to know of it. When? He asked. I think I'll be ready when we arrive at King's Landing. Jon said with a smile he knew was to reassure him, but he wasn't sure if it really did. He tried to put it out of his mind, doing his best to concentrate on other things, such as the tourney itself. Gacy wishing to compete and he not wanting to. Lord G.S., Brienne, Robb, and Cregan. Speaking of the melee and Jon sitting quietly saying nothing of his plans, he knew that both Jon and Loras were competing in the joust and he held no worry for them there. The melee, though, he did worry about. None of them had competed in one truly Brienne had in Highgarden, but there was something about a tourney in King's Landing that made it different. Be it Robert's own excitement, the size of the prizes, or the fact that more people would be in attendance, the tourneys were more dangerous there than anywhere else. Over the years, men had died in jousts and on the field, though he wasn't entirely sure if that was why he was nervous or not. You're pensive, he heard the voice from behind him as he stood on the deck, the city coming into view. Aye, Jon, I am. I am too. The tourney, and knowing what will come after. We'd be fools not to worry. And yet we'd be wrong not to be excited too, my lord. War is nothing to be excited about, Jon. I'm not excited about the war, Jaime. It's what we'll do when it's done. My father's letters, the words he wrote, the things he planned to do once he was king. What was it he said to you before he left? Jon asked. When this battle's done, I mean to call a council. Changes will be made. I meant to do it long ago, but, well, it does no good to speak of roads not taken. We shall talk when I return, Jaime said, repeating the words for the first time in their entirety. Changes will be made, the rest doesn't matter, Jaime. Only that, together we will bring those changes to Westeros. Together we will fulfill the promise that my father would have brought, Jon said. Together, my king, he said, as Jon touched his back and walked away. Once he had gone, Jaime dropped to a knee and closed his eyes. The prayers, he said, were to any god who'd listen, the seven who are one, the red god or the old gods. To each of them he called and begged. If someone has to fall, take me. I beg of you, take me and let him live. Take the father and not the son, the sinner and not the sinned against. His words whispered and lost to the wind. Harrenhal, 28-1 AC. Lyanna, she had been angry and sullen on the whole trip here. Even being away from her father hadn't helped her mood. Though it was her brother she was angriest about. Over that, Ned prattling on and on about how Robert would be so happy to see her. What cared she for Robert's happiness, and why didn't her brother care for her own? That Brandon was also as sullen and annoyed as she was. Didn't help the travel either. Benjen at least was in a good mood. Her brother enjoying seeing the lands around them for the first real time. He'd traveled a little before, but not this far south, and so seeing the Riverlands had been an experience for him. For her and Brandon not so much, and all Ned could speak of was hopefully rejoining with Robert and Jon Arryn when they reached the Crossroads Inn. Something she was more than happy didn't come to pass, as they had arrived before the Lords of the Vale. Seeing Harrenhal for the first time, though, did impress her. Even the bent towers and blackened stone, only adding to the place in her mind. That there were so many tents and people already here was a surprise, And as she looked to see the flags flying over the main keep, she saw Brandon look away when he saw the trout. The black bats of House Wend and the trout of House Tully were both flying at the same height, and above them, the three-headed dragon flew majestically. "Does that mean the dragons are here?" Benjen asked excitedly, never having seen a member of the royal family, something she too was excited about. "Aye, it does, so best be on your best behavior." "I won't have you doing something that brings the family's name into question," Brandon said before laughing loudly. "That's my job after all." Lyanna couldn't resist the smirk, and when they rode to where their tents were to be set up, she was glad that she was considered a lady. Not that she thought of herself that way, or that she was averse to helping put the tents up, more that she wished to explore and see more of Harrenhal, maybe even a glimpse of the Targaryens. She, like Benjen, had never seen any of them, and she wondered if the books were right and their hair was as silver as she imagined it to be. She bought a candied apple from a stall and had just finished it when she heard the noise. Moving to see what it was, she saw the three boys beating up the smaller one. Looking around, she soon found the wooden sword that someone had discarded and picked it up and moved forward. "That's my father's man, you're kicking. Leave him be. Go or I'll break your damn legs," she said as she swung and hit the first of the boys, the second getting a smack across the side. "I'll fucking," the third one said. But the two smacks, she hit him soon. Had him moving away. "Go or I swear, the next hit will be much harder," she said, glaring at them with the wooden sword raised. "Come on, leave the frog eater with the ugly girl. We'll find better sport elsewhere." She watched them walk away as she helped the man up, finding him smaller than she when he stood. It was only then she truly noticed the sigil on his tunic. The lizard lion was almost completely covered in mud. "You're Crenogman?" she asked, and the small man nodded, looking away. "Howland Reed," he said softly. "House Reed has sworn to my father, my lord. I'm Lyanna Stark," she said, with a smile, as Howland looked at her. "Forgive me, my lady. I didn't know," he said, almost shrinking away. "Come, Lord Reed, let's get you cleaned up," she said. And though he looked at her as if he was going to refuse, in the end he walked with her back to her tent. She introduced him to Brandon and Benjen, Ned having stepped out to speak to Robert, who'd just arrived. Lyanna glad she'd not been there when he had. When they spoke of the feast that night, Howland said he would leave, and it took all she had to convince him to stay, even more, to make sure he agreed to come with them. Ned thankfully came back alone, though his attempts to make her care about Robert fell on deaf ears. "Robert is looking forward to seeing you, Lya. You were the first thing he asked about when I met him," Ned said with a large smile. "Was I? Lucky me." "Ned, this is Lord Howland Reed. He's to be our guest for tonight's feast," she said, happy to change the subject. "Lord Reed, an honor," Ned said, as proper and polite as ever. "Lord Eddard," Howland said almost quietly back. "Leah, Robert," Ned began, but she interrupted him before he could say much more about his friend. "Ned, Howland was telling me of how he has no finery for the feast tonight. Benson only brought one outfit, and Brandon's would be too large. Can you help him out?" "I have more than one, but will it fit?" Ned asked. "Find something, I'll fix it," she said determinedly, and Ned moved to the chest. "Lady Lyanna, there's no need. I shouldn't go to the feast." "Why not? You're as highborn as any of them, and you're my guest. You wouldn't refuse a lady, would you?" she said, her voice taking on a mock coyness, but her grin and eyes showing she was pretending. "Never, my lady," Howland said with a smile. Stupid, stupid. Her brother was stupid, and she hated him, she thought as she stood by the tree, the tears still falling from her eyes. The feast had been fun, and she had enjoyed herself. Even with Robert's at first clumsy attempts to speak to her, and then his later drunken groping of women in her eyeline. She didn't care what he did, and he didn't shame her. She had no intent to marry him anyway, and not even her father could force her to do so. Instead, her eyes had been drawn first to the three boys from earlier, watching to see who they served. House Hag, House Blount, and House Frey. A pitchfork, porcupine, and two towers showing who they were. Soon, though, her attention was drawn to the high table and to the king and prince when they came and sat down. Two more different versions of dragons one could never hope to see, one broken and the other glorious. By the time he took out his harp, she already thought him the most handsome man she had ever seen, feeling her chest rise and fall rapidly when she looked at him. When he actually began to play, though, it was like nothing she had ever heard before. The melody deep, and it stirred something in her heart that only riding a horse had ever done before. Just listening to the song made her feel free, all her worries, concerns, doubts, all of them drifting away, and she hadn't even noticed she was crying. "Rozier, are you crying?" Benjen said with a chuckle. "You are, by the gods, you're actually crying over a song," Benjen said. The wine had been instinct, and she was mortified when the prince looked her way, not even seeing the smile on his face or the small nod he gave her. Instead, she had practically run from the tent and found herself standing alone by the tree, her anger and embarrassment forcing more tears from her eyes. "My lady," a soft voice said, and she looked to see a handkerchief being handed to her. "Thank you, Sax. My prince," she said, when she turned to see him standing there, the moon casting its light down, making his hair almost glow in the night. "Prince Rhaegar, Targaryen, lady," he asked as he took her hand in his. "Lyanna Stark, my prince," she said softly as he kissed her hand. His dark eyes locked on her gray ones. Harrenhal 2081 AC. Rosier Targaryen. Had he not already known why his father needed to be replaced, then his thoughts on his wife would have been enough. Yet he also knew he'd never allow them to be parted, despite it being what Eolia wished for, what she needed not just for her heart but for her health too. It was yet another reason he was so desperate for this tourney to be the success he intended, and why he glared at Varys each time he saw him. The eunuch had convinced his father to attend, and Rhaegar found his plans in disarray because of it. Everywhere he went, he was watched, and it was only when he was doing his father's bidding that stopped the spies from following. Walking out to the feast, were it not for Rhaenys in his wife's arms, and the fear he held for them, he doubted he would have even attended. Though by the end of the night, he was glad he had, and looking at the girl as she walked away, he knew she had taken his heart with her. It wasn't what he had come to find at this tourney, not what he had sought, but over the next few days, he found himself so enraptured that even Eolia knew. His wife warning him to be careful and telling him if she could see it, then others could too. His cousin watching him like a hawk. Not that he cared for Robert's feelings in this, Lyanna having made it clear, without question from him, how she truly felt about her betrothed, that Robert himself was doing his best to shame her most every night. Not helping his case, but perhaps earning Robert even more scorn from his betrothed. "Arthur, I need your help, my friend, the Lady Lyanna. I'd like to meet her when I can," he said to his latest knight and oldest friend. "My prince?" "Please, Arthur," he said, and his friend nodded and arranged for their meetings. She was smart, funny, wild, and free of spirit, and after 2 meetings he knew he was in love with her. Each time she looked at him, he found his heart racing, and he could tell she felt something for him too. By the 3rd time they spoke, he knew that Eolia needed to know, and so they spoke alone in their tent while Rhaenys slept, his wife kissing his cheek and giving him her blessing. "Once we've replaced your father, once you take the throne, we announce the dissolution and our children's place in the line." "Ainzier's children, you mean your—" "I'm with child. If it's a boy, you have your heir, Rhaegar. And I've done my duty." Agiel said, "You've done your duty, Elias. I hope he makes you as happy as she does me," he said, and she smiled as she kissed his cheek. It was madness, sheer madness, and he prepared for the onslaught from his wife. She had agreed with him that what Lyanna had done deserved recognition, deserved praise, and so he had praised her, though far more publicly and with far more consequences than he had ever imagined. Seeing her sitting there as he took the joust, knowing deep in his heart he was winning it for her, the world had simply disappeared. All he saw was her, and as he rode to her and the crowd hushed, as he lay the roses down, it just felt right. That they were winter roses should have been a sign, and he wondered if that had played any part in his decision. "You love-struck fool," Eolia said, though there was no anger in her voice, only worry, and that in a way felt worse. Rosier stood alone by the tree that night and worried she'd not show. He was terrified of it if he was being honest with himself. Lyanna came though, and he could see her anger, and unlike Yaya, she unleashed it all at him. "What were you thinking?" she shouted. "Leah." "No, don't you call me that. You don't get to call me that. What were you thinking?" she said angrily as she pushed her finger into his chest. "I wasn't," he said softly. "And that's supposed to make it all right. Make it better. My brother is furious with you. Robert is threatening to kill you. Me, anyone who'd listen." Lyanna said, walking from him. "He threatened you?" he asked. "No, not really. He still has his balls, doesn't he?" she said, and he laughed. "This isn't funny, Rhaegar." "I know, I'm sorry," he said. Why crown me?" she asked, her voice much softer now. "I wish to honor you for what you did, at least I told myself that at first. but it's not the truth, he said. Then what is? She asked, her voice more curious now. I wish to crown you, he said nervously. Why? She asked. Because of you. Because of how you make me feel. When I saw you, I couldn't. I'm sorry, he said, looking at her. You're a married man, Rhaegar. I'm betrothed to another. Lyanna said, shaking her head as she moved away from him. Do you wish to marry him? He asked, and she shook her head even more vigorously. If I wasn't married, would you? Could we? He asked. He didn't get his answer until they were ready to leave Harrenhal, the note coming to him asking him to meet her that night in the Godswood. Making his way there, he saw her standing by the tree and moved towards her, happy to see the smile she gave him as he did so. I got your note, he said as he reached her. Obviously you're here, aren't you? She said back with a chuckle. Wait, he began, but she interrupted him. Your wife came to see me, is it true? She asked. What? That you. That she. Is it true that you're to separate? That she's going back to Dorne? It is. My father wished us to marry, and I tried. Elia tried, but we never loved each other. Her heart belongs to another, as does mine, he said, looking to her. I can't. We can't. Not now. But when? If she goes back then, perhaps, she said, her voice shaky. Robert, he asked. I told him I'd not marry him, that I felt nothing for him. He blamed you, but I told him there was nothing between us, she said. And is there anything between us? He asked. The kiss they shared preyed on his mind all the way back to King's Landing. Nothing had ever made him feel that way before. The future that he had a glimpse of was now so clear in his mind, and he knew that there was only one path in front of him now, one road, and he looked forward to traveling it with her. Harrenhal, 2081 AC, Brandon Stark. He looked at her as they lay together, the hills covering them from anyone's view. Though they were fully clothed, and apart from the fact they were together, they were doing nothing wrong. She smiled and he stroked her face, her eyes glistening as he kissed her softly, and he found that he was lost in their beauty, just as he had been since he first saw her. It was different, though, seeing her at the feast, speaking to her and asking her to dance with Ned, his brother too shy to do so for himself. Brandon finding himself too shy to ask her to dance with himself also. Glad to be able to cover up how he was feeling by using Ned's name. Watching them, he became jealous, and he at first wondered if that was why he made to bed her, though as they had lain together, he had known it wasn't. In the days that had followed, he had spent whatever time he could with her, quickly finding her so very different than any of the other ladies he had known. Comparing her to his betrothed was like comparing a spark to the shiniest of stars, and even after that first night, he knew he was lost. Brandon had thought he had loved Barbara and had tried to feel the same for Catelyn, but looking at her in the morning light, he knew his heart was hers and hers alone. What? She asked him, smiling, when she saw him looking at her. I was just thinking how impossible you are, he said with a smirk. Impossible? She asked, her brow furrowed. Impossible. Nothing in this world should be as perfect as you. Nothing, he said as she laughed. I'm far from perfect, Brandon Stark, Ashara said as she laughed, her purple eyes full of mischief. Maybe you're just perfect for me then, he said, as he kissed her again. That night at the feast, he had to sit with his family, his sister lost in her own daydreams, and he found he couldn't fault her for them, even though hers were far more impossible than his own. He danced with Catelyn and saw Ashara look to him, her face full of hurt and betrayal, and he felt his heart break at the sight. She left before the dance was over, and soon he did too, feigning being unwell and refusing to allow any of them to return with him back to their tents. He found her waking the grounds alone, and he almost had to chase after her, seeing the tears in her eyes, only making him feel even worse than he already had. Thankfully, she agreed to speak to him, though, and he walked with her from the grounds of the keep, past the tents, and down to the God's Eye, the Isle of Faces somewhere out beyond their view, lost in the mist that covered the lake. You know how precious a weirwood is to a Northman? He asked as they stood there. I know, she said softly. Of how a vow in front of one is a vow to our gods, a vow we can never break, he asked. I've heard that, she said, still not looking at it. Alan told me that on the Isle of Faces there are more weirwoods than you can count, he said. And she turned to look to him. So it's not just one I swear this vow to, it's all of them. Brandon, I love you, Ash. You and only you. You're who I wish to marry, who I wish to spend my life with, and no one or nothing will stand in our way. I vow this in front of the old gods, and may they strike me down if I tell a lie, he said. Brandon, she said, shaking her head. I'll speak to my father and tell him how I feel. Tell Hoster. I won't marry her ass. Nothing can make me do so. Will you be my wife? He asked, his voice far more nervous than he had ever been. Aye, I'll marry you, she said, kissing him. He said his goodbyes to her the next morning. They had lain together once more, and she ended up leaving before he did. When it came time for him to actually leave, he found his misery had some company, as Lyanna too seemed as upset as he was. Though he was hopeful too and looked forward to speaking to Hoster and his father to let them know of the choice he had made. As Ned and Robert spoke, he looked to see Benjen and Lyanna whisper feverishly, and he wondered what it was they were speaking of. Given how Robert was looking at his sister, he could tell what he and Ned were discussing, and could see his sister cared not for it. Her mind like his on other matters, no doubt. And he began to wonder if they could help each other out, both of them speaking to their father. He'd have to listen, would he not? If neither of them wished to go through with their betrothals, then he'd have to make other arrangements, wouldn't he? When Robert left, he sighed when they were joined by the Tullys and was glad that Catelyn didn't ride. The idea of having to speak to her all the way to River Run too much for him to contemplate. Instead, he listened as Ned groused about Robert, about Wrecker, and laughed when Lyanna slapped him before riding away. She should do her duty, Ned said, and Brandon shook his head. Not all of us, are you, brother? He said, before he then rode off after his sister. Harrenhal 2081 AC, Robert. God, she was good. Her mouth the very best he'd ever had, and soon he found himself spending the few coins he gave her. She welcomed and he quickly fixed up his breeches and left the tent. He made his way to the feast, and hoped his lateness wasn't noticed. She'd already made her feelings clear more than once with her looks, if not her words. When she deigned to look at him at all that was, though, as Ned said, she was young and a maid, and no doubt he made her nervous. She ignored him again, and so he began to drink, smiling and winking at the girl who served him, and enjoying it when she winked back. At least someone appreciated him, Robert thought as he drank some more. The girl's flirting becoming more obvious, and he grabbed her whenever he got the chance. He heard the hush when the dragons arrived, and he prayed the man wouldn't sing again tonight, though he had to hand it to Rhaegar. He did know how to win over the ladies. He looked to Jon, who was watching the high table, his foster father glaring at Aerys and Rhaegar too, and Robert found himself thinking more and more about his words. Though for now he put them out, his mind, and concentrated on the view the serving girl gave him as she placed the mugs on the table. As he stumbled back to his tent that night, he couldn't help grabbing her arse, the girl laughing as he did so, and he looked forward to the night ahead. "Robert, the melee!" Ned shouted as he shook him awake. "Ned?" he asked. "The melee, Robert. Gods, how much did you drink last night?" "Fuck," he said as he moved from the bed. His head and his balls hurt, and he looked beside him, glad to see the girl had left. "I'll be there in a moment, Lyanna," he asked. "Is up in the stands. Hurry, Robert, or you'll miss it," Ned said, and he dressed quickly. Who he was more angry at, he didn't know. Jon Royce for taking the day, which should have been his, or Lyanna for not showing him any attention whatsoever. Each time he had taken an opponent down, he had looked to her. Sure, she'd be looking down and cheering him on, and each time she was doing anything but. It angered him, and he used that anger to beat more men, only to fall before the end. To make it worse, she cared not for that either, and so he was sullen for the next few days. His attempts to speak to her met with indifference at best, and outright refusal at worst. So he drank more and even got into a drinking game with Sir Richard Lonmouth, the man laughing before he fell to unconsciousness, though he did later help him try to find the errant knight. "Who do you think it is, Robert?" Sir Richard asked. "I don't know, but we'll be the ones who'll find the fucker," he said with a laugh as they searched. As each day of the tourney went on, he felt worse and worse. Nothing he could do or say seemed to be met with anything but a polite smile, and as soon as she could, she would make an excuse to leave him alone. He spent more time with Ned than he did his sister, and it was frustrating him. No end. The night before the joust began, he had tried to kiss her, and she'd slapped him, though at the time he'd laughed it off. The next morning, how she looked at him made him think she wasn't just japing. "Cheer up, Robert, for fuck's sake, you look as miserable as you say I always do," Ned said as the semi-finals of the joust took place. "Do I indeed? I wonder why that is," he said, shaking his head. "I told you, Robert, ever since she found out about Maya, it's been different," Ned whispered in his ear. "I've only the one, Ned. It's not like I've fathered a dozen or more," he said, shaking his head. "Aye, I know." The final had even him excited at seeing Rhaegar against the Bold. While jousting wasn't something he saw the benefit of for himself, he did like the pageantry of it and the wonder of who would be crowned. With Rhaegar he knew it would be Arya, but for Barristan he wasn't sure. Would he crown the princess, or was there a fair maiden that the bold had his eye on? Damn him to the seven hells. Who does he think he is? Robert shouted as Jon Arryn tried to calm him down. As Robert paced in his tent later that day, I told you, Robert, they care not about what is theirs, and what isn't. This is why they must be removed. Aye, you told me, and I didn't listen, but I'm listening now. Ours is the fury, Jon. Ours is the fury, and he'll feel mine. He left a few days later, and she never even spoke to him, the memory of what she had said in the Godswood still twisting like a knife in his heart. She was his, she would be his, and no one would take her from him. No one. As he rode away from Harrenhal, he cursed that Ned wasn't with him, though he was glad Jon was. His foster father was right, hard to get. She must be playing it. She must. I'll not marry you, Robert, even were I not in love with another, I'd not marry you. Her voice in his head as he closed his eyes, and he felt himself grip the horse's reins even tighter. Mine, she is mine, he said as he rode towards the Vale. The Vale of Arryn Harrenhal, 20 AD 1 AC. Jon Arryn. He looked down at his papers as he sat in his solar, his life's work in front of him, and he found himself trying to figure out his next move. The betrothals were set, the Starks tied to the Baratheons, and the Tullys, though having Hoster tied to the Lannisters would have been a boon. He had even considered offering up Elbert to Tywin. Cersei and his nephew, as Lord and Lady of the Vale, would be a good match, he felt. But the man refused all his letters, and he knew he would need to speak to him in person. Once the weddings took place, they could make their moves, bring the dragons down, and see Robert crowned. His foster son was the only logical choice to sit the throne. He felt, even despite his unsuitability. Though with him his hand he could easily cover for Robert's deficiencies. He got up from his seat and walked from the room. They would be leaving on the morrow, and he wished to pray before he left, to seek counsel from the gods and from Septon Lawlams. As he entered the sept, he lit the candles and knelt in front of the Father, praying that they'd soon be in a position to see his dreams complete. The seven kingdoms united under a king of his choosing, and the true gods, the only ones worshipped throughout the realm. My lord, I didn't expect to see you, Lolosum said as he walked over to where Jon was kneeling. I wish to come for guidance before I left Septon, he said to his oldest friend. Your path is the gods' path. My lord, you walk in their light. Trust in that, Locksley said, and Jon nodded. Did the boys come and pray? He asked, and Lallams nodded. They did, young Ned. Took the blessing, though. He liked it not. Robert, too. Good. I fear Ned a lost cause, Septon. His faith in the heathen gods of the north is much stronger than I had hoped. Jon said, Perhaps, or perhaps the gods haven't shown us the right path to take with him yet. Laidalong said, and Jon looked at him. No matter, he will serve our gods in the end, Jon said. As do we all, my lord, Lullamune said before he blessed him, and Jon left to make ready. He allowed Ned and some of the others to ride on once they passed the Bloody Gate, his ward wishing to meet up with his family and Robert wishing likewise. Though Jon wouldn't allow him that, instead saying it wouldn't be proper for him to travel with his betrothed and Robert, then riding off in a huff. Go, Ned, I'll deal with Robert, he said, and watched as Ned reluctantly left his friend behind. Like with most things with Robert, he ranted, raved, got drunk, and then quickly forgot what it was he was upset about. Jon shaking his head at the sheer failure he'd had in teaching the boy anything of being a man. Were it not for his position, he may have sent him back to the Stormlands years earlier, but needs must. And Lallams was right. They needed a man of faith to lead their cause. Not that Robert was such a man, but at least he could be relied upon to leave such matters up to him, and given his aversion to wish to rule, there was clearly no better choice for a puppet king. Arriving at Harrenhal, he was annoyed upon finding out that Tywin didn't attend, though, given that Eris did, he began to see a pattern, and when he saw Jaime Lannister named to the Kingsguard, it all became clear. Tywin hadn't been ill or resigned because of it, as he had been told upon his arrival, nor was he unable to travel to the tourney. The man was annoyed. The dragon had pulled on the lion's tail and taken his golden heir from him. And Jon saw even more opportunities. Opportunities that just kept coming as the tourney developed, and he knew then he was doing the work of the true gods. While Robert ranted, raved, and drank elsewhere, Jon stood in his tent with his nephew and Jon listening to them speak. Gods, what was he thinking? Albert said. Dragons don't think, Albert. I thought you knew that by now. Jon said, the disgust clear in his voice. To shame his wife so. Jon. Albert said, and Jon shook his head. Like father, like son, Jon said as they both looked to him. Come on, we've all heard the words, how Rhaegar was a better man, how the realm would be better off under him. Would a better man do what he just did? No, Albert said. No, of course not, but I had thought, Jon said, and Jon reached out and put his hand on the man's shoulder. They all have it, Jon. With some it's just better hidden than in others, but they all have it in them, he said, and saw Jon nod reluctantly. He sat down and drank his wine, and found himself laughing to himself after they'd left. This wasn't his plan, nowhere close to it. The prince was far too popular, and people thought far too much of him, so he had needed to be sidelined, or better yet killed. He had gone over a number of options, and while he knew that an assassination may work, he had quickly found an even better way, the prince himself giving it to him. Rhaegar wished a council called to gain the Lord's support and bring them onto his side as he removed his father. All Jon needed was for him to approach people, to have his father find out, and then Aerys would do the work for them. Killing the prince would shatter the realm, alliances would crumble, and their alliance would emerge the largest and strongest. People would unite behind his vision, and the crown would be in their hands. Instead of the West, Durin, the Crown Lands, and the reach against them, it would be fractured. More people wishing to see Aerys brought down than supporting him. Aerys' attendance put an end to that, and Jon was left scrambling for a different plan, only for Rhaegar to hand it to him on a silver platter. Robert was furious, Rickard would be too, Hoster and he could play up their own support, and those who would stand against them would seem to be in the wrong. While not yet complete, it was almost everything. He just needed a spark, something to push the realm over the edge, and he had time to see that come to pass. He was eating that night when he was called away from the feast. Robert had not attended, and Jon, while not wishing to deal with him, having no real choice. He found him sitting and crying in his tent, the man acting an even bigger child than he usually did. Rolling his eyes, he sat beside him on the table and waited until his ward told him what was wrong. She hates me, Robert said, and Jon hid his sigh. No, she doesn't, he said. She does. She loves someone else, told me she'd not be mine, that she'd not marry me even if she did not wish to be someone else's wife. Robert said through strangled breaths, she wishes you to fight for her, Robert. To prove your love, that is all. How can I, Jon? I've shown her who I am. She's not like the others. She doesn't seem to like what they like. Or she's playing hard to get, Jon said, and Robert looked at him. Some women love the chase. Robert, just as you yourself do. Do you really think she doesn't want you? No! Of course she wants you. Look at yourself, Robert. Have you ever had a maiden turn you down? No, Robert said determinedly. Then why would Lyanna be any different? Wolves need to be tamed. Robert, it takes a man to do so. Are you a man? I am. Good, then act like one, he said, and stood up, patting Robert on the back. Thank you, Jon, Robert said, wiping his eyes. A boy, a petulant, spoiled boy, and this was who he wished to crown. As he walked back to his tent and lay down on his own bedroll, he reached into his tunic and took out the seven-pointed star. Reading through it, he knew that this was his real reason, his true path, even if along the way he had to suffer people like Robert Baratheon and Lyanna Stark to get there. River Run 2081 Hoster. Seeing the procession as it reached his keep, he looked to see where his daughter was, finding the carriage very quickly. He smiled when his future goodson helped her from the carriage and looked at the rest of the party. There were far fewer Northmen than he expected, and he was surprised that Brandon was the only Stark who had come, having at least expected the rest of his family to join him. Still, he was glad to see the lad again and to see Kat smile so as they walked towards him, his brother and son walking with them. Lord Tully, Brandon said, and Hoster noticed a strange look on the boy's face, but felt it was tiredness, and so let it be for now. Lord Brandon, it's good to see you, though I had expected your family to be with you. Forgive me, my lord, my brother accompanied them back to Winterfell, so I could come alone, he said. And Hoster nodded, though wondered why he wished to come alone. Kat, you look radiant, my love. Did you enjoy the tourney? He said, kissing his daughter's cheek. I did, father, she said, with a smile which he could tell was true. Come, let's get you all inside. I'm sure you're tired and wish a warm bath and meal, he said, and saw his brother nod. While Edmure and Kat saw to Brandon and his men's room, he walked with his brother to his solar, eager to find out all about the tourney and his future goodson. He had Utherides bring him the ale, and he and Brandon took their seats. his brother taking a much larger swallow than he did. "So what was it like?" he asked curiously. "Where to start? The Mad King is mad," Brendan said with a chuckle. "Rose attended?" he asked, surprised. "He did. God's hoster, you should see him. Long hair, long nails, scabs on his arms," Brendan said, shaking his head. "The Scab King, indeed. Aye, what else?" "Oh, Tywin Lannister has resigned as Hand, his son, named to the King's Guard." "He resigned in Harrenhal," he asked. "No, I think he had already done so. They gave Sir Jaime his cloak there, though," Brendan said. "Anything else, brother?" he asked curiously. "I saved the best or worst for last. Roger won the joust. Guess who he crowned?" Brendan said, his features schooled. "His wife," he said, and Brendan shook his head. "His mother," he asks, though he would have been surprised that Rhaegar would attend, and again Brendan shook his head. "Lyanna Stark," Brendan said, and this time it was Hoster's turn to shake his head. "For true?" "Aye, brother, for true." When Brendan left, he sat back and couldn't believe it, cursing that he'd not gone to see for himself. He wondered how Jon Arryn had reacted. Reaching for a piece of paper, he thought about sending a raven, and then thought the better of it. They held a large dinner that night, not quite a feast, but close enough, and he was happy to see Brandon and Kat speak so friendly to each other. His one doubt on the match had been that his daughter would find the Northmen to be to her liking. Her southern sensibilities repulsed by northern attitudes. Looking at how she looked at Brandon Stark, though it was clear his charm and good looks had won her over, and Hoster was most pleased by that. While marriage was primarily about raising one's standing, he was not averse to his daughter being happy with her future husband. Also, looking around the room, he could see that Lorzia too seemed happy for her sister, his youngest smiling happily as she spoke to Petter and her uncle. If it wasn't for the odd looks he kept getting from Brandon Stark, he'd have really enjoyed the night. The news Brendan had given him and his daughter's smiles making him feel most content. But something about the way the wild wolf looked to him disconcerted him, and he found out just what it was the very next day. "You cannot," he shouted, as Brandon Stark stood up. "I can, and I will," Brandon shouted back. "Your father and I have agreed to this betrothal, and you will marry my daughter." "I will not. I love another, and she's who I'll marry. Not my father, and certainly not you will tell me otherwise. I'll see you stripped of your inheritance. You'll get nothing if you don't live up to this agreement. I care not. I came here to speak to you as a man, to tell you to your face. I've done so, and if you'll excuse me, I'll go speak to Catelyn. I forbid you, go back to your precious North Brandon Stark. See what your father thinks of a man who breaks his word. But I'll not have you speak to my daughter on this." "So be it," Brandon said, storming from the room. He was furious the letter had been sent, and it was up to Rickard to fix this. He'd not be made a laughingstock, though, and not have his daughter treated this way. Brandon Stark would marry his cat, or by the gods, he'd burn the fucking North to the ground. 2 moons later, he smiled as he read the letter from Rickard. He had known that his threats would not fall on deaf ears. Not only were they risking his wrath, but he knew how much Rickard wished this union also. As he reread the letter, he smiled and reached over to take a sip from his glass of wine. "Lord Hoster, I have spoken to my son and made it clear that he must live up to his responsibilities, that he must do what an heir must do and accept the match made for him. Brandon is well aware of what will happen should he not, and upon his return from White Harbor, I feel it best if we make the wedding date official. To that end, Brandon will travel to River Run in 4 moons' time to officially announce his intent to marry your daughter. The wedding to take place a further 3 moons from then. I look forward to seeing you in person as we watch our houses be joined. Lord Rickard Stark, Lord of Winterfell, Warden of the North." Hoster made his way down to Kat's rooms, finding her, Liza and Petter, laughing and japing over something or other. He called for her to join him, and they walked to the Septa once. Inside, he asked the Septad for a moment, Kat smiling at Mordain as she left. "Do you wish the Septa to accompany you when you go north, Kat?" he asked. "Could she, father? I'd be most pleased." "I'll speak to the Septon. I have some news for you about your wedding," he said, and saw her place her hands together and sit up straight. "Lord Brandon will be arriving in a few moons for the announcement of your wedding date." "When will the wedding be, father?" she asked excitedly. 3 moons from when we announce it, my love," he said, and kissed her cheek. "Will there be a feast, father, for the announcement?" Kat asked eagerly. "Of course, there will, sweetling, a large one," he said, and saw her smile. "Thank you, father, for the match, for all you've done for me." she said softly. I only wish you happy, Cat, you most of all, he said, and she threw her arms around him. 4 moons later, no one did this to him. No one, he'd see him in the ground, him and his whole damn family. Of all the things he had imagined, this was not one of them. How could he think he'd get away with it? Think that he'd just lay down and accept it, that he had almost killed Petter Baelish was the only bright spot in the whole visit. His hurried departure, looking to be in response to that and not to him telling him to leave his lands. Looking over the letter from Jon Arryn, though, at least gave him something to think about, a way to make things right, though he'd need Rickard's help to do so, and he'd prove to be incapable of getting one son to do his damn duty. Why should he believe the other would be any better? He felt his head ready to explode, such was his anger at the events, the sheer fucking audacity of the boy. What do you mean you're married? Hoster asked. I mean I'm married. I cannot marry your daughter. I will not. Something I told you already, Brandon said. But your father, he said angrily. You really think going around me was going to work? That I'm that fucking dumb, that I didn't expect it? I told you I'd not marry her, and now I can't. When did you marry? How? A moon ago, in front of my gods. A fucking tree, he said angrily. My God, speak to my father. Tell him what I've done. I care not. Neither of you has power over me. Neither of you tells me what to do. Get fucking out. Go. Don't come back, he said. And Brandon nodded as he walked from the room. No, it wouldn't stand if he had to pay all the damn gold he had at his disposal. He'd see Brandon Stark in the dirt. He'd have his marriage, and Cat would have her husband, even if it wasn't the one either of them had expected. But Brandon Stark was not long for this world. That Oathbreaker had a date with the stranger. Outside Harrenhal, Dorn 2082-2083 AC. Rogier. They rode hard and fast, and he prayed she'd be there, that her letter was true, and she'd managed to sneak away. Arthur and Oswald rode beside him, and they too weren't slowing down, Arthur looking around to make sure they weren't being followed. When he saw the horse alone by the water's edge, he began to worry, and then he saw her, and his heart began to beat once again. You came for me, she said happily, as she kissed his face. Of course I did, I promised, didn't I? He said, and this time their lips found each other. I worried you would not, that your feelings may have changed, she asked, and he laughed as he looked at her, confusing her for a moment. They have not, I love you, he said, kissing her again. The road passed Harrenhal and camped by the God's Eye, Rhaegar eager to show her the letter to prove the truth in his words. He watched her as she read it and saw the smile on her face when she saw the signatures. Marry me, he asked, and she looked to him, the letter still in her hand as she nodded. Why not, she said, before breaking into laughter. Of course I'll marry you, she said a moment later, when she calmed down. There's a sept nearby, he said, and saw her frown, and for a moment wasn't sure the reason why. Looking to her, he smiled when he realized what it was. The Isle of Faces. We can go there too. Marry in front of your gods as well as mine own, he said, and she smiled back at him. It took them 3 days to have both weddings, the Septon signing the papers only when he saw the letter from the High Septon annulling his marriage. Arthur and Oswald had happily signed, his friend remarking on how happy he was. The boat to the Isle of Faces had appeared as if by magic, and he and Lyanna had gone alone to Arthur's dismay. He had felt the power of the place and saw how much it had meant to Lyanna to marry there, and once he had said his vows, he had moved to head back. Lyanna, though, had other ideas, and as she took him in his arms, he felt more nervous than ever before. Despite Lyanna being the maid, it was him who was clumsy and awkward. And yet once they began, it was far different than he had ever known it could be. Time seemed to stretch on, the night seeming to last forever. I feel different, Lyanna said as she lay in his arms. As do I, my love, he said, and they dressed. Arthur looked at him strangely when they returned, and it was only the next day he found out why. You were gone, but moments, Arthur said when Lyanna was washing the next day. It felt like hours, Arthur, that place. It's different, he said, and Arthur looked at him and said nothing. They rode over hills and through long abandoned trails, keeping away from towns and villages other than to grab supplies. Something told them they needed to go south, and so they rode, and at night they'd stop and camp. He and Lyanna would make love, or he'd sing for her, and over time he forgot he was a prince. With her, he was simply Rhaegar, and she was Lyanna, his wife, his love, his heart. By the time they got to the tower, it was clear she was with child, and so he sent Oswald to the nearest town, and was happy when he returned with the woman. Willett her name was, and she and Lyanna soon became friends, the older woman reminding her of her mother. Their days became a routine, and as she got bigger, he found himself more sure that what Rem said was true. Their son would come soon, and he would be what he had once thought he was. The prince that was promised, the song of ice and fire, he said softly, thinking she was asleep. My love, she asked. Sorry, I didn't know you were awake. What did you call him? He told her all of it and was shocked when she didn't doubt him once. Yaxlia had thought him mad, strange, and it had taken her time to even consider he was right. Lina, though, just accepted it, and he found he loved her even more because of it. It was blissful, idyllic, the happiest time of his life. He'd lived more in the 4 moons he had with her than he had in the 4 and 20 years before her. Gerald's arrival put that to an end, and they listened on in shock as he told them what had happened, each part of it worse than the one before. Laying in bed with her that night, they tried to think what had gone wrong. They had sent letters, ravens, yet it seemed they'd not arrived, or had been ignored. Now, even though both of them knew what must be done, neither of them wished to speak of it. Jacques, he said smiling as he rubbed her stomach. Our son, she said, her hand beside his. With your eyes. Your hair? She said, and he shook his head. I prefer yours, he said, and she smiled. The prince that was promised to us, my love, our son, she said, and he kissed her. When she slept, he began to write out the letters, the notices of birth, one for Jaxlies and one for Visenya. He knew he was having a son, a boy, a prince, and yet there was a reason why he needed to have them both, and he knew not what it was. He thought of putting a letter for his son just in case, a note to tell him how he felt, and found he could not. Instead, he put the letters inside the chest and placed them beside the egg and the sword, his son's birthright, and he closed his eyes and knelt down to pray. He argued with Oswald while Arthur just accepted, and then he lay beside his wife as she slept, his own eyes unable to close as he looked to her. Leaving her was the hardest thing to do, and as he rode away the next day, he swore he heard a voice calling him, telling him to stay, to not go, though he knew he had no choice. The Trident 28-3 AC. Robert Baratheon. His scouts had been right. The dragon spawn was here, and he looked forward to facing him, to seeing him fall. They had the momentum, the advantage, and once he dealt with him, he'd deal with the others too. Jon was right. They had to die, and so they needed to get there before they could escape. Rhaegar, though, Rhaegar was first, and he'd see him dead on the morrow. He bent the girl over the table and took her from behind, her dark hair and his drunken state making him believe it was her right up until he spent. As soon as she turned around, thought the illusion was shattered, and he was glad he'd taken her this way and not the other. Once she left, he sat down on the bed and reached for the chest, taking it out and looking at it once again. Robert, I write this to you hoping you'll understand, that you'll move on and find happiness with someone who loves you for who you are, and someone you can love too. My heart belongs to someone else, Robert, and by now, I think you know who that is. It wasn't planned, wasn't meant to slight you in any way. It just happened. We have married, Robert. Rhaegar and I married and happy, and I wish the same for you. Forget about me and live your life. Be who you are and not who others expect you to be. That is all I've ever wished for myself, to be Lyanna and not Lyanna Stark. And now more than anything, I'm happy and content to be someone I never thought I'd be. Goodbye, Robert. Lyanna Targaryen. Robert, he heard Ned call out and quickly placed the letter back in its chest. Ned in here? He shouted back once he put it back under the bed. Robert, the battle tomorrow, we need to take him alive. Ned said, and he nodded. If we can Ned, then we will do. For Lyanna, Ned said, and Robert looked at him. For Lyanna, he said, and saw his friend smile. His armor glistened in the sunlight, the rubies sparkling as he moved, and yet Robert could only see the smiling face of Lyanna as he moved towards him, could only see her laughing at him, them both laughing at him. Around him, in the room, they all laughed. Arius, Roa, Elia, all of them. Dragon spawn, he shouted as he moved forward and swung his hammer. Robert, prepare to die, dragon spawn, he shouted loudly. King's Landing, 29T7 AC. Jack here is Targaryen. He closed his eyes and the glass candles went out. Picking them up, he carried them to the chest and placed them inside. Walking from the room, he nodded to Arthur and Walder to follow, and with Ghost beside him, headed to the stables. They quickly had Winter, Star, and Rivers saddled, and all three of them mounted and rode from the manse. They moved slowly through the streets, and he resisted the urge to look at the Red Keep each time it came into view. Reaching the gates, it cost him 2 silver stags to be allowed to leave, and once outside he let Winter free. Ghost racing beside him as they left the others behind. He saw the Kingswood in the distance, and soon they were riding through it. Stopping when they were a decent distance inside, dismounting, he led Winter to the small stream to allow her to drink, and then waited for Walder and Arthur to catch them up as Ghost went about his work. "Jon?" Arthur said as he arrived and quickly jumped off Star. Jay just shook his head and began to pace. Kneeling down, he closed his eyes and went looking for the door. Ghost ready for him, as he always. As one they moved, even more quickly. Jaking guiding him, as well as Ghost's instincts taking them where he needed to go. Soon he saw it, and they moved as quickly as they could. The white wolf running so fast that it never stood a chance. Its antlers soon becoming ineffective as the wolf tore into its neck. He reveled in the kill, enjoying the taste, as much as Ghost did, and when the wolf came back, covered in blood, Jack could taste it in his mouth. Standing up, he looked to Walder and pointed back where Ghost had come from. "There's a white stag just back that way. Ghost will take you to him, tie him to the horses, and we'll drag him to the gates," he said. And Walder nodded as he followed after Ghost. "Jon?" Arthur asked worriedly. "For over 10 years, he's been trying to get that stag, trying to make it a trophy. Well, he's not getting it. I'm taking it from him. And that won't be the last thing I take from him before I'm done," Jack said as he climbed up on Winter. King's Landing, 297 AC. Jaime. They had arrived to very little fanfare, and Jaime found himself laughing about it. Jon Arryn didn't meet them, and instead it was left to Stannis to welcome them to King's Landing, which had led to perhaps the most uncomfortable welcome any of them could ever imagine. Kavan and Jenna were annoyed by the snub, and Stannis was so far out of his depth with niceties that they were on their horses and in their carriages in moments. Arriving at the manse, Jon went straight to his room, and when he went to speak to him, he told him what he was going to be doing. He had asked if he should stay, only for Jon to tell him it was for the best. If he got a night's sleep, that he had no idea how long this would last, and he'd call him if he was needed. While he didn't wish to leave him alone, he found that it was something that Jon needed to do on his own. Though the next morning, when he found out what Jon had actually done, he had been incredibly annoyed. "You should have sent for me," he said to Jon, who looked at him and nodded. Probably. But there was nothing you could do, my lord. This had to be me. I needed to do it. Ask Arthur. Walder. I couldn't even say what it was. I wished to do," Jon said. "All the more reason to send for me, Jon. I should have been there for you. You are. You always are. I needed this, and I don't think I'd have been ready to listen to anyone." "Why the stag?" he asked, realizing he wasn't getting anywhere with the other part of his talk. "I'm going to take everything from him. His throne, his children, everything," Jon said. "His children? His bastards," Jon said, and for a moment he looked at him worriedly, but he knew that Jon would never do that. "I don't understand. I know of 2. There are more, but Maya Stone is in the Vale, and Edric Storm is in Storm's End. I may not be able to get to them, but there are bound to be others here in King's Landing. I'm going to take them and give them the life he didn't, a better life, a good life. He's just not going to know that," he said, and Jaime shook his head. "What did you see, Jon?" he asked concernedly. "The truth, what he did, what he knew, what he felt. I saw it all. Death is too good for him, and so his life is the last thing that I'll take from him." "Jon? No. Remember, Creasier, what I said to him, what I said before you took his life." "Aye, I remember. Robert took everything from me. His jealousy couldn't allow him to accept that my mother loved another. So, before he dies, he's going to think I've taken everything from him," Jon said as he walked away, Walder and Jorah following after him. He wished to call a meeting to have all of them discuss things, but instead he just asked Arthur to join him in his solar. Soon finding out that his brother too felt as he did and was worried about Jon taking this too far, though not for the same reasons he was. It turned out, "I don't wish him to risk so much," Arthur said. "Risk? Aye, Jaime. Last night he seemed to enjoy the idea of taking something from Robert, more so than actually taking it from him. I don't want that to be what he's focused on. I don't want him to take things, Arthur, the throne, but the other things. He wishes him to suffer, to feel as he does, and he can't. He won't." Yaima said, "He needs the intensity, Jaime. I swear, had you seen him last night, if you faced that Jon with a sword in his hands, gods I don't know," Arthur said, shaking his head. "We need to get through to him, speak to him," he said, And Arthur smiled. Margaery, we speak to her and Olenna when they arrive. Watch him until then. Arthur, don't let him out of your sight, he said, and Arthur got up and nodded. He saw them, Jaime, he saw them both, and saw how happy they were. Seeing Robert, We'll be with him, Arthur. I'll speak to the others. He made his way to his room and found Daisy, Joy, and Joanna sitting around, his daughter laughing as Joy fed her strawberries. He stood watching them with a smile on his face, and it was only when Daisy looked to him that it left, Yevon then moving to sit with his wife and watch the two girls as they played. Strawbelly Joanna, Sawbilly, his daughter said happily, clapping her hands, and Joy giggled as she gave her one. Everything is well? Daisy asked, and he nodded, not wishing to spoil things for now. Given how they'd been welcomed, they had no need to present themselves to the king until tomorrow, and that suited him just perfectly. Their meal that night was a quiet affair, though Jon did at least seem to be in a happier mood, laughing with Joy, Martin, and Willem, and telling Tion and Walder what to expect in the duels. He could see how closely Arthur was watching him, and soon Daisy noticed him looking at Jon also. "What's wrong?" she asked, and he told her they'd speak later. Once Joanna was asleep and they were laying on their bed, he told Daisy of exactly what had happened, trying his best to explain things he couldn't truly understand. "He was able to see it all?" she asked. "I think it was more than that," he said. He felt it, felt what Robert felt. He said, "How? Is that even possible?" "Given what he did later, I'd say so. He didn't seem upset, Jaime. At dinner, he seemed himself." "Aye, he did. I worry, though. The way he spoke, he was... Arthur is right. Speak to Olenna and to Margaery, if anyone can help him." "It's his wife," Daisy said with a chuckle. "Aye, I will. I'm sorry for bringing it up." Jaime said, leaning over to kiss her. "I'm your wife. It's my job to help you," she said, as her arms went around him. Sparring the next morning with Jon was much different. He was talkative, he japed, but he was far more focused than he had ever been. While he took the spar, Jon did get 2 hits on him and would have gotten a third, only that by sheer luck he moved out of his way. "When are the Tyrells arriving?" he asked, knowing that Jon would know. "Later today. I think we'll have to go to Robert first." "Are you ready for that?" "I am," Jon said, drinking the mug of water. "Are you sure, Jon?" "I am. I'm good." "Truly. I know what I have to do, my lord. I may not like it, but I know," Jon said as he took his sword and put it away, and they walked back into the building. King's Landing 2097 AC. "Robb!" He looked at the carriages and the horses, the guards and his friends, and thought this was one of the largest processions he'd ever been a part of. Lord Wyman always traveled with a decent accompaniment, and when they'd rode back to White Harbor after the tourney in Highgarden, they'd been joined by the Lords of the Vale. Still, the Lannisters traveled in an even larger group, and after he mounted his horse, he quickly rode to Jon and the others. "Is this not a bit much, just to travel to the Red Keep, Jon?" he asked when he got there. "Aye, but we have the Lady of Castamere riding with us today. We need a large accompaniment," Jon said, and Robb couldn't help but chuckle as Joy glared at his brother. "Not funny, Jon. So not funny," Joy said as she sat on apples. "At least I got them to allow you ride apples." "Joy," Jon said, and he saw her little smile as they set off. He looked to the streets as they rode, the men, women, and children looking to them. He swore he even heard some people speak Jon's name as he and Joy rode with Ghost beside them. He rode close to the carriages along with Cregan and Brienne, while ahead of him, Loras rode with Jon's guards, his king's guard, and Robb wondered if Loras saw himself that way. Given how he was riding with Sorifer, maybe he did, all 4 of them shadowing Jon as they rode. Robb found it funny when he looked back. Jaime and Jon rode together, and the Lords of Casterly Rock and Castamere, respectively, had less protection than Jon did. He wondered if people noticed it or if it just passed them by, and he found himself thinking that this was Jon's life now. Soon this would be how his brother would ride anywhere, though the cloaks his guards wore would be a different color. They arrived at the Red Keep to be met by some Lannister guards and the Master of Coin, Robb seeing how quickly Ghost's haunches raised. Grey Wind and Dusk had been left in the manse for now. Ghost, having been at the Red Keep before, wouldn't raise too much issue, even with his size. All 3 wolves, though, would not be accepted. They had felt... "My lady," he said after he dismounted and helped first Willa and then Winifred from the carriage. "My lord," Winifred said with a smile, as she straightened her dress. Once Lord Wyman and Lady Jane had climbed from the carriage, then Lord Cavan and Lord Emmon did also, all of them making their way to the rest of their group. Jon and Joy watching carefully as their guards moved their horses while Daisy laughed as Jaime swung Joanna around. Had someone told him years earlier that he'd find himself happy to be in the company of Lannisters, then he'd have laughed their ears off. Now, though, he was more than happy to call them friends. "Come, let's not keep the king waiting," Jaime said as Daisy took Joanna from him. The walk to the throne room was fascinating to him. Winifred and Willa, too, seemed just as excited, though his future good sister did seem more interested in what Lancel was saying to her. Reaching the door, he waited with the others while they were announced, and then they were led inside. The king sitting on the Iron Throne with the queen and his children beside him, Jon Arryn and Lord Baelish, who had quickly left them once they reached the doors, speaking to each other animatedly as Jaime stood forward. "Your Graces, I am honored to be invited to this tourney," Yasm said, and Robb saw the king smile at him. "It's good to have you here, Lord Jaime. Will you be competing?" the king asked. "Only in the joust, Your Grace. I leave the melee to my lady wife," he said to some laughs, which the king soon stopped. "Given how proficient Lady Daisy is with her mace, I fear for her opponents," the king said. "As do I, Your Grace," Yang replied with a smirk. As the rest of them were introduced, he watched as the king seemed to be going through the motions until he stepped forward. That was, "Robb Stark, come closer. Let me look at you, lad. Look, Jon, it's Ned's boy," the king said with a beaming smile. "Your brother is your brother here as well? Sir Jon, come up here." "Your Grace," Jon said, and Robb could feel the tension behind him. He too, feeling it though Jon seemed not to. "Look at them, Jon. Two of Ned's lads. You'll be competing, won't you, lads?" the king said with a laugh. "Just the melee for me, Your Grace," he said, and the king looked to Jon. "And you, Sir Jon?" "Both Your Grace," his brother said. And Robb and the others looked on as the king slapped his brother's back, his smile now even larger. "Thank the gods, I had hoped for some entertainment. To see you fight in the melee, lad. Years I've been waiting for that," the king said, the smile never leaving his face as he did so. "Then I shall endeavor to make sure it was a worthwhile wait, Your Grace," Jon said, and the king laughed even louder. "You're here the Tommen. Sir Jon will make it worthwhile for both of us," the king said, and Robb looked to see the prince looking at Jon as if he was the warrior reborn. "Do you have a squire, Sir Jon?" Tommen asked, and while the king laughed loudly, Robb saw both the queen and Jon Arryn ready to speak. "I don't, my prince," Jon said, and even Robb was taken aback by just how sad his brother sounded about that. Father, could I squire for Sir Jon?" Tommen said, and at that point, both the queen and Hand spoke up. "Robert, Your Grace, I'd be honored to have you squire for me, my prince. I could think of no surer way to guarantee my victory," Jon said with a smile, and Robb watched as the prince looked at Jon with wide eyes, the king laughing before looking at him. "Really, you think my boy would drive you to victory, Sir Jon?" "I'd wager he would, Your Grace," Jon said, and the room hushed as Robert looked to Jon with a glint in his eye. "The wager, you say? 1,000 gold dragons says, with Prince Tommen as my squire, I'll win, Your Grace. The melee or the joust?" Robert said, waving them off when the queen and Hand tried to speak. Robb standing there looking at all four of them and to the prince who was watching most eagerly of them all. "Both Your Grace," Jon said to loud gasps and even louder laughter from the king. "By the gods, you've some balls on you, lad. Aye, fine, I'll take that wager," Robert said, still laughing. "Robert," the queen almost shrieked. "Your Grace, surely not," Jon Arryn said. "Hush, it's a damn tourney. It's not like he's taking him around the realm as a fucking hedge knight," Robert said as he looked to the queen who was glaring at him. "Say, Richard, why don't you and Sir Jon have a word with the new squire?" Robert said, and the only sound in the room was Prince Tommen's excited yell. King's Landing 2097 AC. Marguerite. The journey had been long and hard, traveling along the road rather than by ship, adding not just time to their travel but discomfort also. While she liked staying in the tents, after a few nights it lost its appeal to her and to Sansa too, her grandmother having been grown tired of it far sooner than they, that there were not a lot of keeps on the Rosierd, not helping things either. They had stayed with Lord Caswell for a day or two, and she had welcomed the warm bath. But once they'd left Bitterbridge, apart from a few villages, there was really nowhere for them to stay, without leaving the Rosierd far behind them. Something her grandmother wasn't keen on, despite her father's protest. So when she saw the walls of King's Landing in the distance, she, Sansa, her cousins, and Mira all looked forward to sleeping and bathing indoors. For her and Sansa, there was also the knowledge that they'd see Jon, Margaery, finding herself most eager to be with her husband again. The small smile on her face as she thought of him not going unnoticed for long, as she saw Sansa smirk when she looked to her, due to their falling out with the crown, or to be more precise, the crown's falling out with them, the wheelhouse headed straight for their manse instead of the Red Keep. Something she was most grateful for, as she wished to refresh herself before being forced to meet anyone. "Is that Ghost?" she heard Sansa say, and she looked out to see that it was indeed the White Wolf greeting his sister warmly as he and Fang got reacquainted. "I didn't expect. I had hoped," she said, with a bit of a stutter. Nervously, she stepped out of the carriage and was surprised to find that there was no sign of Jon or any of the others. Instead, it seemed Ghost had come of his own volition, something she confirmed when she asked him if he was Jon. The wolf looking at her and cocking his head before shaking it, Fang, though, was just happy to see her brother, and both wolves were soon rolling around the garden of the manse. She and Sansa looking back at them as they were led to their rooms. While Jon didn't come to meet them on their arrival, he didn't wait long to see them either, as almost as soon as she had washed and changed, Sansa and Willis knocked to tell her that he was waiting for them both. Margaery nervously making her way to the garden with her friend and her brother, seeing Jon, Loras, and Robb waiting for them while Cregan, Brienne, and Joy looked to the four wolves who were now playing together. "Sans Margie," Joy said happily as she turned and saw them. Jon turning to face her a moment later, and Margaery saw the smile on his face as he saw her. After saying hello to Joy, who Jon brought over to her, and then to Loras, she watched as the rest greeted Sansa before she was face to face with Jon at last. "It's so good to see you again, Margaery," Jon said when he got to her, his eyes staring into hers as he did so. "You too, Jon," she said back simply as they were then joined by the others. It took her almost an hour to be alone with him. Sansa was as keen as she to spend time with Jon, and it was only when Jon looked to Loras and Sansa looked to her that they were left alone. Sansa showing them around the gardens, while she walked with Jon into the manse, and Willis walked back to speak to their grandmother. Once inside, she didn't even bother to take him to her room, instead just opening the nearest door and pushing him inside. "Gods, I've missed you so much," she said as he took her in his arms. "And I've missed you, my sweet wife," he said before kissing her deeply. They stood there in each other's arms, Jon alternating between kissing her and brushing his fingers over her face, his smile ever present as he did so. "I'm sorry about your uncle, Jon," she said as she looked at him. "Thank you," he said, his voice showing he didn't wish to speak of it just then. "The pin, Jon, I tried to make it work again, but it wouldn't," she said, changing the subject, which he seemed happy about. "More than once?" he asked, and she nodded. "I think it needs more blood from both of us. You said you just pricked your finger. I think it needs more than that," he said, and she looked at him. "You wish me to cut myself?" she asked, a little shocked. "What? Never," he said, his fingers on her face, before he smiled at her. "Besides, I have something for you that will help also. Oh, that reminds me, your gift. I have your gift in my room," she said, as she moved to the door, only for Jon to hold her hand and pull her back to him, making her giggle. "You really think I'm letting you out of my arms that easy?" he said, silencing her with a kiss when she went to answer. "The others," she said a few moments later, "are showing Sansa some of King's Landing." Joy was ever so eager to do so. He smirked. "You?" "No, it was all her. She's far too clever. Marge," he said. While she wished she could just stay in the room forever, she knew she could not, and so, reluctantly they left and walked down the corridor. Margaery telling him they should speak to her grandmother, and Jon agreeing. They found her in her solar with Willis, both of them going over papers, and her grandmother seemed surprised to see Jon there. "Lady Olenna, Lord Willis," Jon said, as they walked into the room. "Jon," her brother said, while her grandmother just looked at them, and Marge, upon realizing she was still holding his hand. "Let go." "Jon, I'm sorry for your loss," Olenna said, and Jon just nodded her grandmother too, picking up that he didn't wish to speak on things. "I thank you. We have much to discuss, Lady Olenna. Perhaps a more arranged meeting can be held," Jon said. "Of course, tomorrow after we present ourselves in court," her grandmother asked, looking at him. Tomorrow. I do have a favor to ask," Jon said. "Of course, Jon," Willis said. "I'd be much obliged to hear your take on the king's mood," Jon said cryptically. "Jon, her grandmother asked. I can say no more for now, my lady, but at our meeting we can speak more freely, he replied, and she found herself looking to him. After some small talk about how their trip was and telling them that the king had agreed that Prince Tommen was to squire for him, they bid their goodbyes and Jon escorted her to her room. Once she was sure no one would see them enter, she snuck him inside, and almost as soon as the door was closed, they were kissing again. Jon moving her to the bed and laying both of them down on top of it. We can't, she said, as they kissed even more passionately, and Jon raised himself on his elbow to look down on her face. Marge, I wouldn't, as much as I wish to, I wouldn't until we were wed in front of your family, he said, and she felt herself breathe deeply, knowing that he wanted to as much as he did. I want to also, Jon. You know that, right? She said, looking to his eyes, her fingers moving over his lips as she looked up at him. Thank the gods for that, he said, and she slapped his shoulder, laughing loudly as he began to tickle her. Jon, stop, she said, her laughter bringing tears to her eyes. As my wife commands, he said as he then kissed her neck softly, sending goosebumps down her arms. They lay in each other's arms for some time. The knock on the door telling her that it was time for dinner almost coming by surprise. Jon got up and then helped her up, and as she fixed her hair and checked herself in the looking glass, he came up behind her and whispered in her ear. This is the last time, Marge, the last tourney he'll ever hold and the last tourney I'll ever attend where we have to hide, he whispered softly. Later that night, after he'd left and she'd eaten, she lay in her bed and her excitement at the thoughts of what he had said began to dim. She'd concentrated so much on the good part of Jon's words that she'd missed the other part, the more ominous part. If this was the last tourney, then that could only mean Jon meant to take the crown, which meant that soon they'd be at war. She felt the shiver down her spine at the thought of it. Soon the people she loved, her family, her husband, soon they would be fighting for their very lives. King's Landing 277 AC. Richard, he'd never had such an odd request from the king before, but like all the orders he got, he'd see this one done also. With help from Barristan, Vidlar, and with bribes, he moved into position and began the work. Once it was done, they quickly left and he made his way back to his building. His men happy to have seen it through. After changing his clothes, he walked to the Lannister manse, both to tell the king it had been done and to speak to Arthur or Jaime on it. Though it had been an odd request, he found he both enjoyed thinking what the reaction would be and what Lomas would make of it. The king's new master of whisperers would no doubt be sent to find who had done such a thing, and unlike Rosie, he would find out some of it at least. Richard's lips would only ever spill their secrets to him. Should anyone be lucky enough to find one of them, they'd learn nothing. While Varys believed the only way for his little birds to keep their secrets was to remove their tongues, Richard had picked his lips far better than that. They were loyal because he made them loyal, and he also afforded them cover, protection, and ensured their families were provided for. This was not the same with those the lips themselves used. With them, Richard could never be certain of their silence, and he knew that they were more likely to be discovered at some point. So the Whispering Skull had been born, and tales had been spread amongst the people of the things he did, impossible deeds he had undertaken, and numerous ones of his origins. He was SOC Westerosi, a man from Dorne or the Reach. He was a sellsword, a bastard son of a lord, or his personal favorite, and the one that Lomas would find out, a faceless man. Entering into the gates of the Lannister manse, Richard began to whistle. Only a faceless man could carry out what he had done tonight. Rhaegar and I believe Jon was hoping to see you. Jorah said as Richard spoke to one of the Lannister guards. I'll take him in from here. How is he asked as they walked into the manse. Richard had worried about Jon the closer they got to King's Landing, and seeing his uncle's body and the man who killed him only making that worry stronger. Determined, Jock said as they reached Jon's room, Walder on duty at the door. Jon welcomed him in, and Richard was surprised when he poured him some wine, looking at his king as he held the bottle in his hand. I figured when I met people I should at least be able to offer them a drink, Jon said with a smirk as he poured himself a mug of water. I wasn't suggesting, Richard said, but Jon shook his head. I know, but best I put your worries at bay, Jon said, looking to him as they took a seat. It's done? Aye, it's done. You're sure about this? I want him mad, Richard, angry. Why? I saw Harrenhal, saw it all. Felt it, almost lived it. It's hard to explain, Jon said, looking down at his mug. What did you see? He asked, and Jon told him all of it, even mentioning his drinking contest and his search for the Knight of the Laughing Tree with Robert. By the search, Jon, had I known who the knight was, I'd have never, he said, but Jon interrupted him. I know Richard. Robert and you were friends. Not exactly. He was fun to be around, Jon. Charming and fun, and he liked to enjoy himself. We were young men, and we liked to enjoy ourselves too. And now? Jon asked, and Richard shook his head. Were it only just what happened on the Trident, then, I'd wish to see him lose his head, but what he did in the throne room, what he said, no, they deserve better than that, he said, draining his glass and happy when Jon filled it back up. I have another strange request for you, Richard. Will you see it done? Ask of me anything, my king, he said determinedly. Robert's bastards. I wish to know how many, where they are. I want them taken from here and given a better life elsewhere. Can it be done? I know of 2. Neea Stone and Edric Storm. There are more? He asked, even though he knew of it 6 more. The blacksmith's apprentice, I believe he's one. Jon said, and Richard looked at him, surprised. How do you know Jon? I met the lad a few years ago. He made my shield and fitted me for my armor for the honor joust. Ever since I've decided this, I've been trying to picture them, and he came to mind. I'll find them, Jon. All of them. Thank you, Richard, Jon said with a soft smile. After speaking to him on other matters, including arranging a meeting with some of the loyalists and Jon wishing him to look to some of the others, not to tell them just yet, but to look. Richard left the room and went looking for Jaime or Arthur, finding both of them together in Jaime's solar. You know, he asked, and saw Jaime nod. Aye, the stag is one thing, the bastard's another. Jaime said, He's right to do this, Jaime, to find them all, to move them from here, he said, and Jaime and Arthur looked to him. Why? Apart from what it'll do to Jon Arryn and to Robert when he finds out, it's best we know of them all, he said, a little too ominously for Jaime. You don't mean to, you can't. You can't. Jaime said, horrified. What? Gods no, I wasn't speaking of harming them, he'd not allow us to do that, he said, and Arthur nodded. Then what? Jaime asked, We need to control them, Jaime, where they grow up, what they know. We need to have them under our control, otherwise we'll have to see them dead, he said, and saw Jaime look to Arthur, who nodded once again. I'm worried he's getting reckless, what he did in the throne room, what he promised, the stag and now this, Jaime said. He's not. We won't allow him to. But he's not. He's focused, Jaime. More so than I've ever seen anyone. The throne room was an example of that. How? He swore to win the damn melee and the joust. Arthur said, and Richard laughed before he spoke. Did he? I must have missed that. Richard? Jaime said, confused. He got the king to give him Tommen as his squire, did so in such a way that the queen and hand are angry. Guess who was just appointed as Tommen's sworn shield? Sir Barristan, Arthur said with a smirk. But he wagered he'd win, Jam said, and Richard chuckled. He may very well, but whether he does or doesn't, it matters not. He got the prince as his squire, and he'll not be going back to the Rock without him. Richard said, as he left the manse, he began to get ready for the work he had to do. The finding of the bastards wouldn't be a problem, as he knew at least half of them, or he hoped it was half. Getting them out of King's Landing and into a better life would be slightly more difficult, and he'd need the help of loyalist houses for that. As he looked at the Red Keep in the distance, he smirked, wondering what the morrow would bring. King's Landing, 297 AC. Olenna! They lined up ready to walk into the throne room and meet with the king and queen, Olenna eager to see what his mood was like and to find out why it was that Jon wished them to pay so much attention to it. She didn't have to wait long as they were introduced and walked in to find the king drunk and in a foul mood. The queen glaring at him and the crown prince staring at her granddaughter. Your graces, we are honored you've invited us to this tourney, Mates said with a smile, and she didn't like the way he looked to the crown prince. Indeed, it's good to have you here, Lord T.A. The queen said, her voice far more friendly than she had expected, though the king's snort from beside her showed what he thought of their attendance. I look forward to the tourney, your grace. Will there be a hunt this year? Mate said to the king, and she thought he was either going to fall from the throne or to jump up and take Mace's head, such was how intensely he glared at her son. No, Lord T. Earl, there won't be a fucking hunt this year, the king said angrily, and she watched as Mace almost stumbled as he wilted and moved away quickly. As they were walking from the room, she saw Littlefinger walk their way, and she knew that she'd not be able to get away from speaking with the man. His quick steps soon catching up to her, though it was his smiling face and the way he looked at Sansa and her granddaughter, which annoyed them and aggravated her even more. Forgive me, Lady Tyrell. I was hoping we may have a word, he asked, and she wasn't sure what it was that annoyed her most. His eyes which took everything in, the false smile of his face, or the smell of mint. Of course, my lord. Willis, why don't you escort Sansa and your sister back to the mansai? Of course, grandmother, her grandson said, leaving her with left, right, and little finger. He made small talk as they walked to his office. How expensive the tourney was, how people were looking forward to the events, and how Joffrey wished to speak to Margaery, all of it making her even more annoyed by the time they reached it and more than eager to be away from him as quickly as she could. He did offer her wine and cheese when they reached it, though, and she accepted them more out of courtesy than want. Forgive his grace, my lady, it seems someone decided to play a prank this morning. Littlefinger said, he's upset over a prank. Have you heard of the White Stag, my lady? The prize his grace has been seeking for years. I have. Well, not only has someone else bagged the prize for themselves, but they saw fit to place its head on a pike on Traitor's Walk in place of the head which was there, he said. And she saw how his eyes looked to her to see if she gave anything away. The head that was there, Prince Viserys, he said, and she almost burst out laughing. No wonder he was so upset, she said, and Littlefinger nodded. My lady, I wish to speak to you more on the Crown Prince. As you know, he's recently stayed with his uncle on Dragonstone. By all accounts, it seems his time there has done him the world of good and helped rein in his temper. Much needed that it was, she said, and Littlefinger nodded. Indeed, as such, my lady, her grace, was hoping that Lady Margaery would join them for tea. She sat looking at the man and his eyes in particular, while he'd learned to school his features and to put on a practiced smile. Littlefinger had never been able to bring that smile to his eyes. The truth of his thoughts always clear in them. Right now, he was looking at her calculatingly and almost willing her to refuse him, and she knew she could not. Very well, my lord. If you'll make the arrangements, she said with her own practiced smile. I will, thank you, my lady, he said. She had no wish to stay for much longer, and thankfully neither did he once he got what he sought from her. So bidding him goodbye, she walked from his office and made her way from the keep, almost bumping into the fattest man she'd ever seen as she did so. Forgive me, my lady, the fat man said. I will if you look where you're going next time, she said. And the man smiled as he looked at her. You must be Lady Olenna, he said, looking to her. Must I now, and you are? Illyrio Mopatis? My lady, it's a pleasure to meet you. She looked the man over once more and cursed that her mind had been elsewhere. Had it not then, she'd have known that this was the fat magister, and her introduction would have been more pleasant. Though there was nothing to do about that, and if anything, it seemed the man expected her to be as people said. I've heard a lot about you, Magister. Perhaps we can arrange a meeting in the future. I'm sure we'd have much to discuss, she said, and the Magister smiled. We would, my lady, no doubt. I'll have my man do so. As she watched the man waddle away, she wondered if she'd ever get to hold that meeting, knowing that if he had been responsible for the death of her uncle, she'd see him in the ground. Given how Jon felt about family, she felt it only a matter of time, and she smirked as she walked from the keep, a white stag. Well played, Jon, she thought. King's Landing, 2097 AC. Sansa. She had only briefly spoken to Jon as she understood that he would wish to spend some time alone with Margaery. Having Robin Cragen here, though, had meant she hadn't missed out on family, and having Joy also allowed for her to have a girl to talk to. When she found out that Winifred and Willa were here also, she had hoped they'd join them as they looked around King's Landing, but both girls had been tired out from the journey. Joy served as their guide, with Ghost, Grey Wind, Dusk, and Fang, ensuring that no one bothered them too much. Though they only looked around the city very briefly, Sansa was eager to see the Septon, the Red Keep. After dinner she had slept and found that she too had been more tired than she had imagined, though perhaps the comfortable bed and being indoors helped with that. Meeting the king and queen had been stranger than the last time she had done so, and she felt Margaery's discomfort when the prince looked her way. Her own discomfort soon rising when Lord Varys made his way over to them. Not having Fang with her here, she felt almost exposed, and instead of the wolf's instincts guiding her as Jon had shown her, it was left to her own. I do not like that man, Margaery said as they left the Red Keep. Nor I, she said in response. Jon, she heard her friend say, and she looked to see Jon waiting for them outside with a large group. Joy standing beside him along with Robb, Loras, and the others. She was pleased to see that Winifred and Willa were there also, and more so to see just how much of a good mood her brothers were in, all of them seeming most pleased they had caught them. We had hoped you ladies would join us on a tour, I believe my brother was most remiss yesterday, Jon said, looking to Robb, Sansa chuckling at the glint in her brother's eye. You said you'd show us, Robb said affronted. I did? Really? That doesn't sound like me. Did I say that, Joy? Jon said, and Sansa and Margaery giggled when Joy shook her head. Robb leaning forward annoyed until Winifred whispered in his ear, and he looked deviously at Jon. Ladies, Jon said, offering them both his arm. Joy quickly doing likewise to Cregan. Soon they were all walking to the stalls, and Sansa saw how excited Joy became when they saw the candies. Jon's purse thankfully stretching far enough to cover candies for all of them. As Sansa looked and noticed she'd not brought her own, she found Jon made a much bigger show of it than Robb did, filling in pieces of history as they walked, and that it was mainly the history of the Targaryens didn't really surprise her. He spoke of the Maiden Vault as they sat and looked back at the Red Keep, of how Balor confined his sisters there and what a fool he was, something which surprised her, but pleased both Joy and Margaery. Then telling them of the Sept of Balor and finally the Dragon Pit, and she was pleased to see all of them seemed to know of his dragons. Aegon's Hill, Visinia's Hill, and Rhaenys' Hill, this place wouldn't exist without what the Conqueror and his sisters did, Jon said with a proud smile on his face. I'm Joy Hill. Joy said to laughs, and she watched as Jon moved over to the girl and put his arm around her. My favorite hill of all, her brother said as he kissed the girl's forehead. After taking them for lunch, which Jon bought, he walked them back to their manse, saying his goodbyes, and telling them he'd see them at the night's feast. Sansa, finding she'd enjoyed the day so much that she'd almost forgotten about it. She spent the rest of the day reading and getting ready, making sure that Fang had enough to eat and drink, and then the knock came to her door to let her know it was time. My lady, would you do me the honor of allowing me to accompany you? Willis said, and Sansa smiled as she curtsied. I would be honored, my lord, she said as she happily took his offered arm. The ride to the Red Keep was short, and when she entered, she was happy to see how it was lit up. The throne room looking far different than it had been earlier that day. It was as she was being led to her seat that she saw her mother having arrived being a big surprise to her, and she looked quickly to see if Margaery or Jon had noticed. Margaery had not, but she couldn't see Jon, though she could make out the table they sat at. When they rose for the king and queen, she found her eyes drawn to her mother once again, and then looked to see her brothers were looking at her instead of the king and queen. She had no sooner sat down than Willis pointed out that her mother wasn't the only family she had that had arrived here tonight. Sansa looking to where Bran was sitting with the Lords of the Vale. I had not expected either of them, she said quietly, and Willis reached out and placed his hand on hers. You don't need to speak to your mother if you don't wish to, Sansa. However, I'm here for you if you need someone to talk to, Willis said, and she smiled glad for the offer. She was walking back from the privy when she saw him, his guard behind him, and she felt stupid. She'd not brought one of her own. Joffrey smiled when he saw her, and she found it to be one she cared very little for, and how he moved towards her as he did so. My lady, you should not be walking alone. The Red Keep may be well guarded, but a lady such as yourself would tempt a man into being most foolish. Joffrey said, and Sansa felt ready to bite back. Indeed, though a foolish man may find he's met his match, my prince, she said almost angrily, and watched his scowl appear almost as she finished speaking. Would they, I wonder, Joffrey said and moved a little closer. There you are, Sansa. I wondered where you'd gotten to. She heard Willis say, and turned to look behind her as he walked towards her with two of his guards. Lord Willis, the prince was just telling me that it's dangerous for a lady to walk alone here, she said, not looking, but knowing the prince was glowering at her behind her back. Then perhaps I should escort you back to the Great Hall, my lady. I thank you, my lord. My prince, I welcome the warning, she said as she took Willis's offered arm. King's Landing 207 AC. Cersei, Sir Justin made her days, and sometimes when she was lucky, her nights also, far more bearable. Not only was he an accomplished lover, but even more than that, he was willing to learn. The knight was not afraid to take suggestion, and he was eager to see her satisfied. In turn, it made her more willing to do whatever he wished, and over the moons since his appointment, they had lain together countless times. She had even gotten with child, though the Moontie soon took care of that, as she had no wish to have another child. Not unless it was from the man she had always wanted one with. Seeing him in the throne room had been hard for her, smiling with the northern whore, speaking to their whelp, her anger rising all the time. Though it was the bastard who soon drew her ire, how he had managed to get her son to be his squire was beyond her. You cannot mean to, not with a bastard, Robert. Ned's bastard and a fine knight. It's what Tommen himself asked for, and it's only for the damned tourney. I'll not have it, Robert, she said angrily. You will. I've given my word and we've wagered. I'll not go back on that, not for you or for anyone. I want him to be protected, she said angrily. Ned's lad would never see him harmed, he almost shouted back. Sir Barristan, I wish Sir Barristan to be his guard. If he's to be with a bastard, then I'll not have the shame of it without it, she said. Very well, he said, and walked away. Though she had gotten her way, it didn't feel like a victory, and as she watched Tommen speak to Jon Snow, she felt her anger rise again. Looking closer, she tried to shake the image from her head, the smile and the way his eyes would look when he did so. She watched as he fixed his hair, the tie almost becoming loose, and she found she wished to rip it from him, to throw it on the floor and run her fingers through his hair. Grabbing a glass of wine, she drank it quickly, shaking her head and wondering what had come over her. Why was she feeling a tingle in her stomach, thinking of Jon Snow? She looked to the head of his table and saw him there. Her brother, her twin, her other half. The tingle became even more pronounced, and she found herself watching him for most of the night, smiling when she saw him walk from the hall alone. Sir Justin, I must be excused. Could you walk with me? She said, and saw the knight smile. She quickly found the privy, where her brother had gone to, and looked to see the hall was clear. Grabbing Sir Justin, she pushed him against the door and began to kiss him hungrily. When she heard Jaime's footsteps, she moved back to the opposite wall and beckoned her knight to her. Like an obedient dog, he came to her, and soon they were kissing once more. Cersei grabbing his arse and pulling him closer to her as they did so. Jaime, she said when she saw him open the door. Sir Justin looking from her to her brother, with a look of shock on his face. Your Grace, Sir Justin, Jaime said, and she looked on stunned as he just walked away and headed back to the great hall. She felt her anger rise and looked to Sir Justin, the knight speechless, and not looking back at her. Grabbing him, she pushed him into the privy, eager to try and quell the hurt in her heart and the ache between her legs. Fuck me hard, she said, and the knight needed no second invitation. King's Landing, 2097 AC. Illyrio Mopatis. The king was furious, and not the hand, the master of coin, and certainly not the queen, could calm him down. Instead, it was only the master of whisperers saying he'd find out who had done it, which did. Illyrio hadn't been sure if it was the loss of Viserys' head or White Stag which had replaced it, which fueled his fury more. Jon Arryn telling him later that the king had spent years trying to take the stag as a trophy. As he looked around the room, he was glad he'd stayed for this tourney. The idea of seeing most of the major players in the realm too good for him to resist. His brief meeting with the Queen of Thorns had shown him that she was as Varys had told him, and he looked forward to speaking to her more soon. Glancing at the table they sat at, he looked to her granddaughter and smiled. The girl would make Aegon a worthy bride when the time was right. Though it wasn't the roses he mostly concentrated on that night, instead he found himself looking to the table where the Lannisters sat. Given their connection with the North, he wasn't sure which way they would go in a war or whose side they would take. There was definitely a disconnect between them, and the crown, though, and it was one he would seek to take advantage of. He soon found himself looking at Jon Snow, the bastard who had risen so high and who was the reason why the North and Lannisters were so friendly. As the dances started, he was surprised to see him dance with the Rose of Highgarden. Though as Robert said from beside him, the lad's sister was fostered there. She wasn't the only one he danced with either, which showed him that he was just being polite, though no bastard could ever match a prince in the eyes of a great house. Ask Lord Jaime if I can speak with him, he said to one of his guards. He didn't have to wait too long for a response, as the man came back a moment later, Lord Jaime asking him to meet him on the balcony. Illyrio and his guards arrived first, and he was surprised when Lord Jaime arrived with Jon Snow, their guards and his soon standing at the door. Lord Jaime, a pleasure, he said, looking at the lion and the bastard who stood beside him. Magister Illyrio, my former squire Ser, Jon knows far more of our business interests than I, so I asked him to join us. Lord Jaime said, and he nodded. As I have heard, it's good to meet you, Sir Jon, he said with a large smile. You too, Magister, I've heard a lot about you, Jon said. Good things, I hope, he said with a laugh which neither of them joined him in with. Many things, Jon said a moment later. Your work in Essos is impressive. Lord Jaime for Westeros to achieve such success is unheard of, he said, looking to the Lord. We've been most fortunate, Magister. To that end, I'd like to offer you a proposition, a way to increase that trade. Which is? Lord Jaime asked. As you may have heard, I have many contacts in Essos, many trading partners and routes. I'd be willing to allow you access to those partners for a price, he said with a smile. Why would we be interested, Magister? Jon said, looking at him. I can help you expand Sir Jon, he said, his eyes narrowing as the boys did. Perhaps, I'm sure you could write up a proposal, Magister, one which we could both benefit from, Jon said, and the smile on his face was much truer. And Illyrio fought the urge to laugh. Indeed, perhaps after the opening ceremony we can meet and discuss it further. Lord Jaime, that sounds like an excellent idea, Magister. On the morrow, then. Lord Jaime said, on the morrow, Lord Yaxier, Sir Jon. Magister, Jon said, and Illyrio watched them leave. Glad to have baited the hook. He couldn't really get into business with them. Jon Arryn would never trust him, not even if he played it as leading them false. This was more about judging their character, and he found it lacking. That a lord would allow a boy to lead his hand, even one who had as much success as Jon Snow had, was not someone to fear. Illyrio found himself laughing as he walked back to the Great Hall. Westeros would be so much easier to rule than Essos ever could have been. Magister, Magister, he heard Loxley say, his steward clearly agitated. What is it, Loxley? He asked. A letter from Essos, Magister. Most urgent, he said, handing him the letter. Elio, young Griff has been severely wounded. He lives, but he may not for some time. Griff. He felt his heart almost stop, the pain in his chest forcing him to lean against the wall as he looked at the note as it fell to the floor. Loxley sent for water, and he drank it down quickly, his head spinning as he did so. This couldn't be. His son had to live. He had to. The ship Loxo, make it ready to sail immediately. Magister? Immediately, he shouted. He walked with his guards to his carriage, and they rode from the keep to the largest of his buildings. Illyrio waiting until the ship was ready. His men were good, though, and within an hour he was ready to sail. Within 2, he was traveling to Essos, eager to see his son, and to pay back those responsible for his injuries. Aegon would live, he thought, as he sat and ate. Aegon must live. King's Landing 2097 AC. Jaehaerys Targaryen. He knew how they felt about what he was doing, and try as he might, he couldn't get the words out to explain why they were wrong. Yes, he was angry, and yes, he was being reckless. But sometimes you needed to be. The stag had been pettiness, and he knew it was wrong, but he also knew how Robert would react. Taking it from him would make him rant and rage, just as he had seen with the glass candles. The king was a boy who had never grown up. Even his foster father believed him so, and everything Jon had seen of him proved it to be true, whether it was what he saw when he looked at him, or what he'd seen when he'd watched him in the past. To take something he believed belonged to him was Justice J.C.A. felt, and so he would take it all. As he placed the head in the chest, he knelt down and closed his eyes before saying a small prayer over it. In time he'd recover the rest of the body and give his uncle the funeral he deserved. As a prince of House Targaryen, for now, this would have to suffice. He had warged into the mouse and watched as Robert spluttered and shouted, as he had ranted and threatened to kill them all. The man who hated dragons so much, sounding way too similar to his grandfather for Jon's liking. Over the day, it had moved to the stag that Robert was most annoyed about, and when he found out about his bastards, then Jon knew it would be time. He'd considered putting the 3-headed dragon flag up instead of the stag's head to show him who had taken it from him. This, though, wasn't the time for that, and it was better if he was far away when he did so. Nodding to Arthur as he walked from the room, they waked to the Street of Steel, and he entered Tobo Mott's shop. Sir Jon, the Keurig-smith said as he entered. Master Mott, you know of me. I watch everyone for whom I've made armor for Sir Jon. When Lord Jaime told me of your intent, I watched ever more curiously, he said. And Jon smiled at that. Your apprentice, Master Mott, is he here? He asked, and the smith nodded and called Gendry out. Gendry, come here, lad. Jon looked at him as he walked from the back. Had he any doubts, he was right. They'd be gone right now. The dark hair and blue eyes alone would have made him wonder. The size and muscle tone marked him out even more, and as he looked at him, he found he reminded him of Renly rather than Robert, though it was impossible that he was his sire. Sir Jon, Gendry said with a smile. You remember me, Gendry? I do, Sir Jon. You and your shield, Gendry said, laughing, as Jon did also. Master Maud, I have a proposition for you and your apprentice. A profitable one I'd like you both to consider. Of course, Sir Jon. Well, listen. Sitting in the crowd later, he felt good about the day. He looked to see Margaery with her family, Sansa and Robb sitting with them. Brain was sitting with the Blackfish and his mother, and Jon tried not to look at the trout or her brother, Joy, having pointed them out, and made a face earlier when she did so. Sitting down beside her, he took the offered pen nut and smiled as the king stood up to make another announcement before the day's archery began. I welcome you all to the tourney of 2097 AC, the tourney to celebrate the demise of the dragons, the last of the dragon spawn, having fallen to my own hand. My lords, my ladies, I give you Viserys Targaryen, Robert said, laughing. Jon turned to look to the king and then saw Margaery and Sansa look to him beside him. Joy grabbed his hand and he heard a loud gasp from the crowd as he looked out to the open field. The horse was decked out in his house's colors, the black and red caparison emblazoned with the three-headed dragon. Though it was the rider that Jon and everyone else in the crowd was focused on, tied to the horse was his uncle's body, decked out in crude scales and painted to look like a dragon. It took a moment for Jon to realize Viserys was naked. Where his head should have been was a piece of wood shaped like a dragon's head. Were that not bad enough, the minstrels began to play, and Jon closed his eyes as the king without courage was played loudly. Jon, he heard Joy say softly from beside him, as she leaned in closer to him. I'm well, he said as he opened the door, and once he did, the horse began to run, then stepping in its way as it raced for the open gate. There was nothing he could do to stop this show, to save his uncle this humiliation, and so he had done the only thing he could. He had tried to limit it. As the horse left the field, he heard the king shout at people to bring it back, to catch the dragon spawn, and he found his eyes drawn to him. He turned away and forced the flames down, the fire not ready to be released just yet. Joy placed her arm around him as she moved even closer to him, her hand still gripping his tight as she looked to him with worry in her eyes. Jon leaned forward, kissed her forehead, and tried his best to smile. Thank you, little sister, he said softly.